Chapter 856. The entire Red Earth Basin was silent. Even the 6 heavenly sons from the upper sects of Taoism lowered their proud heads. If they were the one facing this sword, they would have died even more easily. They were the top group of people from the Jindan upper realm in Joseon. They had a clear understanding of their own strength, the strength of the upper sects, and the strength of the Yuanying upper realm. In their eyes, they would never be able to cross realms and kill such a strong person from the Yuanying upper realm. At most, they could rely on their own more systematic and extensive methods to escape, but they did not expect such a person to be so weak under this single-eared sword. Tianguan licked his dry lips and said stubbornly, "I wonder if this single-eared sword or the 3 heroes of Huan. Who's better?" He Shidao sighed. "You have a face now." The 3 heroes of Huan referred to the 3 freaks from the Jindan upper realm in Joseon. Each of them had the ability to cross realms and kill, and even had records of doing so. One of them even killed the Yuanying upper realm. It was extremely terrifying. Among them, there was the sun and moon eyes of the 1,000 Buddhas, nicknamed the Big Small Eyes, the snorting breath of the Qingwei immortal sect, nicknamed the Snotworm, and the sending words lips of the primeval cave, nicknamed the Rabbit Split Lips because of the strange shape of his mouth when he chanted. Now, there was the addition of an ear. Chu Tu had long lost the will to find trouble with this single-eared sword, but his mouth was still full of criticism. He has such a good face, but now he has an ear. It's not proper, it's not dignified. They were jealous, but the cultivators of the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce were silent. They did not know how to deal with it. The Yuanying spiritual master was a friend of the owner of the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce. He often came to settle down and solve some problems. But who would have thought that the swordsman would provoke him without warning and cause him to lose his old life here? He did not even have the chance to use his skills. He lost his life without knowing why. This swordsman was too unreasonable. It was a thing that made people droop. It did not fit the tradition of the Zhou Xian upper realm at all. If they weren't so careless, if they treated this swordsman as an opponent of the same level, if they didn't want to regain their dignity, there were too many ifs. Although they might not be able to withstand this terrifying swordsman, it was still possible for them to achieve a dignified outcome. Even if they were defeated or forced to flee, it was still possible. Cultivators who had never experienced a war between cultivators would never understand the significance of the first 3 axes. In a war of the universe, if you don't go all out and do your best in battle, you will only be able to display your skills in the underworld. The possibility of that is too great. The people of Joseon didn't understand, but the people of Wuhan City did. The awkwardness didn't last long. A metallic sound spread throughout the Red Earth Basin. "I've lost my friend. What a pity. For the sake of my red soil, my 1,000-year-old friend, woohoo. Since you have the ability to kill Yuanying, I'll treat you like a great cultivator. Isn't this bullying you? Cutting off my descendants, destroying my foundation, killing my good friend. This hatred, this karma. Today, I'll have to take you as a sacrifice to those wrong souls." The entire Red Earth Basin seemed to have been cast by magic. It solidified not only the clouds and the air, but also the colors of nature and all living things in the vicinity. Every cultivator realized that they had lost control of their own bodies. They couldn't speak, they couldn't move, and they couldn't use their skills. It was a perfected cultivator. Tianguan and the others could only look at each other. Under the suppression of 2 realms, even they, as geniuses, had completely lost the ability to control themselves. Only a sword chime could be heard. It was still proud. Lu Xiaoyi stood proudly. The perfected cultivator's suppression was so terrifying, but it couldn't erase the will in his heart. Most importantly, the big bird in the Sparrow Palace flapped its wings, ignoring the perfected cultivator's suppression. It gave him the freedom to use his sword and move freely. Although it was difficult, he was fearless. This was the reason why he insisted on putting the sword spirit in his sea of consciousness. One day, when he wanted to use his sword, even the gods wouldn't be able to stop him. Not bad. Not bad at all. If such a person is killed by my hands, the Red Earth Merchant Guild will cease to exist, right? Xiao Yao, you won't let me go, because I made a move against a junior. But I'd rather give up the Merchant Guild of tens of thousands of years to send you to the Yellow Springs. Otherwise, what kind of person am I? A figure slowly appeared in the void. A skinny old man appeared in the sky. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of death. It was the leader of the Red Earth Merchant Guild for the past few hundred years, Hu Jiogong. He had only been a martial monarch for a few years. Perhaps it was because the Merchant Guild had not been doing well recently. They had lost their only bloodline, disgraced themselves in Yunhai, and were ostracized by the other two merchant guilds of Red Hill. With the help of countless treasures, he had luckily become a martial monarch. This was also one of the reasons why the two beauties of the Huangting Taoism didn't seek revenge after suffering a great loss. After all, with a perfected cultivator in charge, everyone had to give him some face. In fact, Hu Jiogong had already given up on revenge for the Yunhai massacre. He knew very well that the three of them involved two upper sects. He couldn't afford to offend any of them. They didn't deal with him now in exchange for his silence. If he made a move, it would be a disaster. There were countless perfected cultivators in the upper sects. Which one of them was he, a newcomer, able to deal with? But what he didn't expect was that this Xiao Yao Yu bastard didn't know death. He was confident in his strength and wanted to cause trouble for him. He even killed his best friend. With the new and old grudges, he no longer had any scruples. The Hu clan had been doing business for tens of thousands of years. They had a lot of wealth. They didn't need to accumulate wealth anymore. The reason why they kept running the Chamber of Commerce was just to continue the business and to make a promise to their ancestors. Now that he was a perfected cultivator, where couldn't he go in the universe? Today's injustice would affect his state of mind. Therefore, he made up his mind to end it once and for all. I know what you want to ask me. You're right. I was the one who found those people. So what? You won't have another chance. He pointed at the swordsman who came with Lu Xiaoyi. I won't treat you unfairly. With so many of your friends buried with you, you won't be lonely when you go down. Am I a very kind person? He then pointed at Tianguan and the other five. Since we're going to do it, we might as well go all out. You so-called upper sects occupy the best continent, the most abundant spiritual opportunity, and the most abundant resources. You've always looked down on us from the bottom of your heart. Even when doing business, you never forget to use your power to oppress others. I've tolerated you for a long time. Today, I'll end it all. As soon as he finished speaking, the pressure between heaven and earth increased greatly. Everyone felt like they were carrying a mountain on their backs. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, was barely able to fly due to the pressure. He knew that he might only have a chance to strike once, and that his sword might only be able to fly out. To say that he could kill a perfected lord 2 realms above him was an insult to the cultivation world. But even so, he had to use his sword. It was a kind of unyielding spirit. Even if there was no right or wrong between the two of them, his sword was a little shaky. It wasn't as smooth as when he faced Yuanying. He flew to the highest point and slowly landed. He could even see the disdain in Hu Jiogong's eyes. So what? At least I used my sword. At this moment, a bolt of lightning seemed to explode in the sky. No, it wasn't lightning. It was sword light. It was incomparably brilliant. It suddenly slashed down and directly hit Hu Jiogong's head. Hu Jiogong didn't fall. He pointed at the clouds and said angrily, "Your sword vein is a bully." Chapter 857. After so many twists and turns, everyone was shocked speechless. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, had an idea and flew towards the clouds. Above the clouds, an old man in a tall hat and robe looked at him quietly with a calm expression. Lu Xiaoyi bowed respectfully. "Thank you for your help, senior. How should I address you?" The old man said, "Ili of Yaoying, you don't need to thank me. Compared to the help you gave Yaoying Sword Palace, Hu Jiogong is not worth mentioning. It is rare to have such swordsmanship at such a young age. In my opinion, your swordsmanship system is not Zhou Xian's inheritance, is it?" Lu Xiaoyi understood. This was the only Een-Soul perfected monarch in Yaoying's Sword Palace. Due to the rules, he could not interfere with the gains and losses of his land. This was depressing, but there was no other way. If he interfered, would the countless Buddhas of Bitter Zen Temple just stand there and watch? It would only be worse than now. This included Yuanying of Yaoying's Sword Palace. This old man had followed him because he wanted to repay him. This was a swordsman's temperament. They could not tolerate owing others, so they had to show their gratitude. It had to be said that his luck was not bad. If Ili had not followed him, he would have most likely died here. It was impossible for him to cross two realms. The difference in all aspects was too great. He could not even mount a sneak attack. His judgment of the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce was still the same as when he traveled with the two women 10 years ago. At that time, the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce did not have any perfected monarchs. After Hu Jiogong became a monarch, he kept a low profile. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes and ears were closed. He only thought that with his rapidly increasing strength, he would have no problem dealing with the Yuanying from side sect. He also had a group of swordsmen helping him. It was a foolproof plan, but because of a mistaken information, he almost lost his life here. Who owed who? No one could say for sure. The positions of there, but were different. Ili valued the legacy of his sect more, so he felt that this compensation was not enough. Lu Xiaoyi valued his own life more, so he felt that there was no need to draw such a clear line. The old sword sovereign's eyes were very sharp. After all, this was his profession. He looked at swordsmanship from a different perspective than others. Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. Yes, my swordsmanship is... Ili waved his hand and interrupted him. You don't have to say anything. I'm not interested in knowing. If I had returned to Jindan, perhaps I would have had the intention to change, but now... Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Thank you for your understanding, true monarch. It's a bit complicated, Ili said with a faint smile. You can go to the heaven and earth chessboard and do your best. It shows that although you are in the carefree wanderer, your heart is still swordsman. I have a suggestion. I wonder if little friend Dan is willing to listen? Lu Xiaoyi was very straightforward. Tell me, as long as it's within my power. The old sword sovereign looked into the distance in the direction of Yao Ying and sighed. The future of Yao Ying's sword palace is bleak, and its legacy is in danger. After this battle, the Bitter Zen Temple's backup plan will definitely follow. Although there won't be monks coming personally, with the Bitter Zen Temple's background, there will be countless people who are willing to work for them. Yao Ying has a 500-year period of rejection of Buddhism, but there is no reason to reject Taoists. All kinds of people with ulterior motives will enter Yao Ying to spread their teachings and cause trouble. Yao Ying only has a few Jindan left. Yuan Ying is being watched and can't go out. How are we going to deal with the matters on land? Lu Xiaoyi was worried, but it seemed like he couldn't help with this kind of thing. Ili continued. Originally, Yao Ying could ask the sword vein for help. But this time, the sword vein of the heaven and earth chessboard has also suffered heavy losses, and it's difficult to maintain itself. I can't ask for more people to help Yao Ying, and I shouldn't ask for more. They have already done what they should do, and I shouldn't ask for too much. My thoughts are with the scattered swordsmen. These people are used to wandering alone, and they hate being trapped in one place with restrictions. They will come when the game of chess decides life and death. But if you ask them to help Yao Ying pass down the legacy and manage the land, none of them will be willing to come. But they are willing to treat you as their leader. Lu Xiaoyi completely understood, but he wasn't too willing. The scattered swordsmen weren't willing to be restricted, but he was willing. In carefree wandering, he could do whatever he wanted as long as he was happy. However, if he brought this group of sword cultivators to guard Yao Ying, then he would be stuck with them and would never be able to get rid of them. They would be tied together with Yao Ying and little Lu, unable to tear them apart. Of course, even if he rejected, he had to be tactful. True sovereign, it's not that I'm refusing. There are a few problems that I can't solve, and I can't make the decision. Firstly, I belong to the carefree travel now. How can I have the authority to establish a legacy outside? This is a big taboo in the 9 great sects. Although I'm a mask, it's just an empty title. I don't have enough experience, and I can't be trusted. I don't even have a right to pass down the legacy in the carefree continent, So how can you let me out to lead a continent? Secondly, although there are a lot of Jindan cultivators in Yao Ying Palace, there should still be a few Yuanying cultivators, right? I'm not saying that I have ulterior motives, but these scattered swordsmen are unruly and won't be easy to convince. Once they reach Yao Ying, who will they listen to? In the long run, there will definitely be conflicts. If they can't help each other, they will cause internal strife and become a laughingstock. Lastly, as for the legacy, these scattered swordsmen probably want to learn the strange sword techniques of my disciples, and not the orthodox Zhou Xian sword techniques of Yao Ying. If they continue to pass down the legacy like this, what kind of results will there be? If 1,000 years later, Yao Ying is no longer Yao Ying, then what's the point of your arrangements? I'm just being rash and speaking the truth. Please don't blame me, true sovereign. Ili nodded. This kind of important matter couldn't be decided so easily. I'll talk to the upper echelons of the Carefree Travel Association. You don't have to worry. To be able to plant a nail right under the nose of the Buddhist sects, the Taoists are willing to do so. This is especially true for your Carefree Travel Association. In the past few thousand years, you've repeatedly lost to the Buddhist sects. Your 2, 3, and 2 points are actually the same thing. It's just a question of the direction of the Yao Ying legacy. Whoever passes it on to will be the master. Actually, in terms of system, which one do you think is better, your current sword technique system or Zhou Xian sword technique system? Lu Xiaoyi, the old sword sovereign side. Don't laugh. I know that you don't care about the Yao Ying sword technique system. Actually, it's not just the Yao Ying sword technique. You don't even care about Zhou Xian's system, right? Although I don't know where your inheritance came from, I know that to be able to do this at the Aurus core stage, it must be the most impressive sword lineage orthodoxy in the universe. When I was in the nascent soul stage, I might not be as good as you. Now, the nascent soul stage cultivators are even more so. Therefore, if you're willing, in the future, the Yao Ying sword technique will be passed on to you as the master, and the Yao Ying sword technique will supplement you. After all, the Yao Ying sword technique can go from foundation establishment to true sovereign. If you agree to become the master of the Yao Ying sword technique, I will personally discuss the pros and cons with those Yuanying Jindan cultivators. However, Lu Xiaoyi still had questions. Why would you make such a radical choice when there's still a true sovereign and several Yuanying cultivators in the Yao Ying sword technique? If you continue to endure with the lifespan of a true sovereign, you can definitely wait until the next Jindan cultivator rises. Chapter 858. Ili said solemnly, there are 2 reasons. First, I've already said that wavering shadow Jindan is scarce. According to the rules of the Zhou Xian upper realm, Jindan is in charge of internal affairs. How can those few hairy people resist the erosion of the Buddhist lackeys? Second, do you think that we sword vain spiritual masters and perfected lords can continue to protect the orthodoxy? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Ili chuckled. The conflict between the orthodox sect and the upper sect will cause endless trouble. Although we've fought for our rights in the domain, we've been in the upper sect for hundreds of thousands of years. How can we allow you to be so arrogant and disrespect the upper sect? Spiritual masters and perfected lords, regardless of whether they are from large or small continents, have the obligation to go out into the universe to fight. Once they go out into the universe, they will be under the complete control of the upper sect. The dangers of the universe are unpredictable and cannot be estimated. If in the next few hundred years you hear that wavering shadow spiritual masters and perfected lords have fallen, don't be surprised. This is inevitable. The upper sect acts with hidden ruthlessness, hiding in the river of time. Can you never leave the continent? Then why do you cultivate the sword? Wavering shadow spiritual masters and perfected lords, have the same strength as Jindan. It's very difficult for me to deal with upper sect cultivators of the same realm, but I'm not like you, who can crush anyone of the same realm. If you can still maintain this level of strength when you become a Yuanying perfected lord, then that's the true way to establish yourself. Therefore, don't think that I don't have feelings for the Wavering Shadow legacy. It's because I have feelings that I hope that the Wavering Shadow legacy will not slowly collapse in the river of time and become an insignificant part of history. I'd rather choose to rely on the more powerful sword vein orthodoxy. I only hope that in the future, my Wavering Shadow system can have a place in it, even if it's not that important. Are you willing? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Perfected Lord, you've really given me a big problem. Forgive me for being blunt, but I don't see what I can gain from this. To me, personal cultivation will always be the most important thing. Illy stared at him. What can you gain? If you control a piece of land, in theory, you have the same right to participate in the domain politics as the 9 upper sects. Of course, your words may carry little weight, but you will no longer be an outsider. You will have the right to freely enter and exit the Zhou Xian upper realm. Whether it was bringing people out or bringing people in, the secrets of the upper realm of Zhou Xian may not be fully revealed in front of you, but some clues will not escape the attention of those who are interested. Not to mention, there would be a continent backing you up, providing you with a steady stream of manpower and financial resources. In Shaking Shadow, you can do whatever you want and plan according to your vision. You don't have to worry about anyone questioning your decisions. Isn't that enough? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Perfected Lord, if you put it that way, it's as if I want to overthrow the Zhou Xian upper realm. That's too big of a hat. I can't bear it. Eli's eyes were sharp. Just because we can't withstand it now doesn't mean we won't be able to in the future. At the very least, you still have 500 years of quasi-safe time to plan. Subversion? Shouldn't the Zhou Xian upper realm be overthrown? Perhaps the 9 great sects didn't want to, but which of the 3,000 unorthodox groups didn't? However, they did not have the strength to do so. They just didn't have the support of such a strong orthodoxy. I wanted to overthrow some things since I was in Jindan. This is also the common wish of the entire upper echelon of the sword vein. This time, I'm just testing things out because I'm in Shaking Shadow. In the end, from Jindan to Yuanying, and then to Perfected Lord, I realized that I still couldn't overthrow the mountain on my back. It was only then that I realized what we lacked. We lack the inheritance of the sword range that can truly stand out from the rest of the world. We lack external stimulation. You may or may not have these things, but why don't I take a gamble? Lu Xiaoyi was very innocent. Perfected Lord, you're getting more and more ridiculous. Ha! My little heart is thumping. Illy looked at him meaningfully and took out a jade scroll. In here, there are records of the battles, contacts, and operations of the Zhou Xian upper realm outside the universe for thousands of years. I can't guarantee that it's complete, but most of it can't be wrong. Maybe you'll like it? Lu Xiaoyi took it. I don't like it. I don't like it. Are you encouraging me to be a traitor? Are you so willing to let outsiders harm the Zhou Xian upper realm? Illy laughed. I don't want to destroy Zhou Xian. No one could destroy Zhou Xian. But I hope that there will be a great change in Zhou Xian. A real change that starts from the bottom up, to allow my sword vein to have true freedom. Is this a high request? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously. Perfected Lord, I'm just unwilling to let Shaking Shadow fall, because we're both swordsmen. I don't have any other thoughts, and I don't dare to have any. However, I still have to ask those individual swordsmen about this. After all, they're the main force supporting Shaking Shadow. Illy smiled and waved his hand. Go, go. But they're not the core. There's only one core, and that's you. Lu Xiaoyi slowly flew down. His mind was racing. He had only come here to find his Jew city. In the end, he didn't find Jew city, but he received another surprise? Or perhaps a huge pit. This old man must have seen something and guessed something. With his abilities as a perfected Lord Swordsman and his understanding of the universe's sword vein, he must have guessed something about the inheritance of his sword technique. Reject? Was that even possible? Rejecting him would not dispel the old man's suspicions. For a perfected lord who had already predicted his own demise, what would he not dare to do in his final moments? If you couldn't destroy someone in such a state, you had to go along with him. At the very least, before his body and Tao dissipated. Of course, there were many benefits to it. He would have his own team, the right to participate in decision-making, and greater autonomy. Actually, the only downside was that he would have to spend some effort imparting some swordsmanship to others. He would no longer be alone, free to move about without any worries. He had never been stingy with his sword technique. There were too many things that could not be replicated in his sword technique growth. For example, the ease of obtaining the sword spirit, the significance of the star technique to the Big Dipper sword spirit, the true meaning of the 5 elements, the true meaning of massacre, the powerful spiritual energy, the star pill, and the increasingly mysterious sparrow palace. Even if he taught them everything he could, they would never reach his level. To have 30% or 40% of his level was already a great achievement, so he was not worried about not being able to control them. He had never thought that he would one day become the master of a piece of land. It was not that his level was too low. In the Joseon upper realm, there were many top-notch cultivators like Little Lu who were Jindan. He just felt that everything was too sudden, and he was not ready to welcome it all. There might be a good outcome, or he might bury himself in it. This was a blank piece of paper. The key was how he drew it. At the very least, the basic conditions were there, and there were dozens of Jindan swordsmen worshipping him. Was there a better starting point than this? Chapter 859. The swordsmen were still waiting for him. They found it strange that their leader had the backing of a true Lord Swordsman, even though he was so powerful. This was a cheat. Tianguan and the rest came to bid farewell to him. They had seen enough. They needed to report back to their own sects and start to value this cultivator and re-evaluate their relationship with him. The Terminator Chutu looked at him meaningfully. Daoist Shan, you are welcome to visit the Yellow Court when you have time. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Of course. I still have some friends in the Yellow Court. The outsiders were gone, and the Red Earth merchants were nowhere to be found. Without their biggest backer, they would have a lot of trouble in Red Hill. What they should really consider was whether they should continue to establish the Red Earth Merchant Guild, or be swallowed by the other 2 merchants who were eyeing them covetously. That was what they should consider. The onlookers had also left. Who knew who these murderers would target next? Would they start to rob after removing the defense? Only 40 swordsmen were left. They were still waiting for Lu Xiaoyi. To be honest, they were all in the Jindan realm. They were all arrogant and had their own thoughts. They would not submit to others easily. Other than the most determined Che Xie, Feisha, Nandang, Song Rong, and a dozen others, most of the other cultivators did not doubt Senior Shan's strength. Instead, they had doubts about whether they should follow him in the future and learn new sword techniques from him. However, ever since Lu Xiaoyi killed the perfected Yuanying, all of their doubts disappeared. To a swordsman, what else could make them so obsessed that they would give up their free life of cultivation? Only the charm of one sword. To be a true swordsman. To be a swordsman who would no longer be looked down upon by the other cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi came to the center of them and went straight to the point. The person who saved me was not some backer. It was true Lord Yi of the Yaoying Sword Palace. He was grateful that we had worked hard for the Yaoying Sword Palace, so he helped us. Here, there are 2 things that I must explain to you. Firstly, I am from the Free Wandering sect. Of course, I used to be a follower of the 7 colors. Everyone knows the reason. Secondly, if you're interested in exploring the ocean of swordsmanship with me, it's not impossible, but I have a condition. Song Rong was very hesitant. Don't tell me that we all have to join Carefree Travel. Senior brother's swordsmanship inheritance came from Xiao Yao. If you don't enter the sect, you can't teach it to me? But I've never heard of Xiao Yao use swordsmanship inheritance being so sharp. It was no wonder that he had such suspicions. For the majority of itinerant cultivators, especially those with ambitions and pursuits, they were resistant to joining the 9 upper sects. This was because they had reached a certain level of maturity. Naturally, they harbored a faint hostility towards the so-called upper sects. This was especially true for those orthodoxies that pursued themselves, such as sword cultivators. If such conditions were true, it was very likely that most of them would not follow the Carefree tour. This was their nature. Between freedom and becoming stronger, there was always a choice. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No, I've already promised True Monarch E that in order to help the shaking Shadow Realm rebuild order, I need a large amount of Jin Dan investment. True Monarch E has taken a liking to you and has entrusted me to take care of you. I can't control you. I can only attract you with the passion of learning swordsmanship. In 3 months, I will be waiting for you at the shaking Shadow Realm. If you come, then we may have a long time together. This condition was much more attractive than joining the Free Wandering Sect. In a sect like the Free Wandering Sect, outsiders like them would definitely be ostracized. How could they tolerate this? The reason why they didn't join a sect was because they didn't want to be taken in by chance. But going to the Shaking Shadow Realm was completely different. Firstly, the Shaking Shadow Realm was a pure sword vein orthodoxy. This didn't conflict with them. They were willing to risk their lives to help the chessboard of heaven and earth, which was a kind of recognition. Secondly, it seemed like they could be the head of the sect. This needed to be confirmed. Lastly, they could learn Senior Brother Shan's swordsmanship system here. Chasia was careful. Boss, if we go to the Shaking Shadow Realm, will we be living under someone else's roof? Or will we be the head of the sect? All of us will only listen to you. If we get into a dispute with the Shaking Shadow Realm people, because of this, then we will lose the meaning of helping the Shaking Shadow Realm. Lu Xiaoyi was certain. I will be the head of the sect. I will be the head of the Shaking Shadow Sword Palace and the continent. You don't need to listen to anyone else. The Shaking Shadow Realm cultivators will choose to fade away, and Jin Dan will join us. I hate being ordered around the most in my life. I already have a mother-in-law from the Free Wandering Sect. Don't tell me I have to find another one. Nandang was a little excited. The Shaking Shadow Realm orthodoxy will also be taught by Senior Brother. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. It will complement each other. You may not be able to learn my things very quickly, so the swordsmanship of a mature sect will only be beneficial to you. I will also do my best to remind you of what you can work on and what you don't need to waste time on. But to the outside world, we are still the Shaking Shadow Realm orthodoxy, so it won't be good to provoke the Buddhists too much. Before you grow up, I think you've already seen this point clearly on the chessboard of heaven and earth. Song Rong was eager to give it a try. Boss, I still have some swordsman friends in the 3,000 side sects, but they are all lonely souls. For various reasons, they didn't come to the chessboard of heaven and earth. The main reason is that time was too rushed. So many of them didn't receive the news. But I can guarantee that their hearts towards the sword are not any weaker than mine. I think that everyone here is the same. If Senior Brother needs, I can pull in a few more friends. I guarantee that they will all be loyal and courageous, with iron blood and sword hearts. Seeing that everyone else was nodding, Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, I don't reject any true swordsman. I also believe that everyone here who is willing to throw their lives into the chessboard of heaven and earth definitely won't have any disloyalty. But that may not be the case for outsiders. I need manpower, but you should all be careful. Don't be greedy for more than you can chew. Who are our opponents? You all know very well in your hearts. Actually, it's not just the Buddhists. Those Taoists might also want to mix sand into the Shaking Shadow Realm. So, quality is more important than quantity. Quickly find people and don't delay for too long. When the upper sects know that you're going to join the Shaking Shadow Realm, there will be more underhanded moves. Fei Sha suggested, Senior Brother is right. We are all from the chessboard of heaven and earth, so we are all very pure. Who would know about the changes now? But the future is hard to say. I think that we should pull people in, but don't tell anyone about joining the Shaking Shadow Realm. Just use the excuse of preparing to resist the Buddhist invasion. Those who are timid and have ulterior motives will definitely not be willing to join. Everyone rubbed their palms in anticipation. They were full of ambition. If they could really build a sword vein based on Senior Brother Shan's swordsmanship system in the future, they might not be able to rival the 9 upper sects, but the Shaking Shadow Realm would be a nightmare to anyone who dared to bully them. And they could be the people who created history, the pioneers. Which swordsman wasn't hot-blooded? Chapter 860. After making arrangements with the rogue cultivators, he had a long talk with Ili before Ili personally escorted him back to the Carefree Travel Association. Being led by a perfected cultivator through the sea of clouds was another experience. No one cared about the wealth of the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce. Lu Xiaoyi did not care, and neither did the other swordsmen. If they still wanted to rob them now, not only would they be immoral, they would also be unwise. The swordsmen destroyed the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce because of personal grudges. This was an example. They were seeking revenge, not robbing. If word got out that they did not take a single spirit stone, it would be a story of revenge. But if they were to rob them, it would arouse the vigilance of all chambers of commerce. If they did it once, there would be a second time. This would attract the hostility of the Zhou Xian business community. The loss would outweigh the gain. They talked about many things, except for Lu Xiaoyi's Sorvain. In Li's words, "I'm afraid that if I knew, I would change my original intention." Ili lamented, "I have some relations with a few perfected cultivators of the Carefree Travel Association, and we are against Buddhism. There are thousands of Jindan in the Carefree Travel Association. You are just one of them, and one who is not qualified to learn the root method. You are strong, but you are not loyal. That is awkward. In the mortal world, a general like you would be beheaded after the emperor rules the world, the kind where your whole family would be executed." Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. "Senior, can't you say something more auspicious?" Ili continued, "Don't underestimate the traditions of the sections. Although you don't care on the surface, when you reach a high position, you will know how helpful it is to be a native of the Carefree Travel Association. You will never be able to truly integrate into them. They will never truly accept you, just like you will never truly accept them either. They're just using each other. Since you can still make use of each other, why not have a strong force? At that time, they will have no choice but to respect you. This is the rule of the cultivation world. They will think, oh, we are in the Shaking Shadow Association, and little Lu still has a force that listens to us. Before you become strong enough, you should keep them in this illusion. When necessary, you should ask them for help. It's hard to say whether they will help you or not, but since it's coming to their door, they all enjoy the process of being begged." Lu Xiaoyi rolled his eyes. "And then bite back when your teeth are fully grown?" Ili didn't care. "If you have good teeth, then grit them. If you have bad teeth, then replenish your calcium. Do you still need me to teach you this? If you understand all of this, why don't you do it yourself?" Ili sighed. History and tradition are burdens that you can't get rid of if you carry them for too long. That's why our flicker shadow can't do it. But now that Shadow's shaking realm has been replaced with new blood, you can do it. You've just started, and you don't have to worry about anything. It's time to reconstruct history. You could do whatever you want. This is the best era. Senior, do you and those adepts have to go out into the void of the universe? Actually, we can also deal with them through the Taoist sect. Lu Xiaoyi asked a very realistic question. Ili shook his head. When a cultivator reaches Yuanying, there are some things that they must face. You can't rely on others, because you can't be like this forever. This might be the end of the world, but it might also be a new life. Cultivators have to search for that sliver of possibility in the impossible. So we won't beg anyone. To the bitter Zen temple, if something happens to us in the universe, then they will truly let go of their failure in the Flicker Shadow continent. Otherwise, they will keep watching you. A few days later, the two returned to the Carefree Continent's Carefree Mountain. This was much faster than walking through the crack passage. Ili went to find someone he was familiar with to communicate with, while Lu Xiaoyi went to the Great Freedom Hall. He needed a hand over his mission. Taoist Mo sat in front of the hall, carefully sizing him up. His expression didn't seem right, so Lu Xiaoyi was very careful. "Taoist, if there's nothing else, I'll go back." Taoist Mo suddenly opened his mouth. "In the heaven and earth chessboard, how many thorn monks did you kill?" Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was the bitter Zen temple sealing the news of the Flicker Shadow chessboard. They didn't want the whole world to know about this scandal. "Just one. I tried to avoid them as much as possible for the rest." Taoist Mo sighed. "I originally wanted to send you there to discuss the Buddhist sect, but I didn't expect you to turn the tables around. One ear, your contribution isn't small. Even I can't report it. Lu Xiaoyi was very modest. Isn't this all because of Carefree's reputation? The teachings of the martial uncles and Taoist Mo's ability in dispatching them? Taoist Mo, it's because I went to the right place at the right time. Actually, it doesn't matter who was sent there. Taoist Mo was a little disappointed. The more this new disciple spoke like this, the more he didn't think of himself as a real carefree person. He was afraid that his contributions would shock the master, and he was afraid of being oppressed and ostracized. It wasn't entirely his problem, but Carefree Travel's own problem. It took two hands to clap. He was just an insignificant yuaning in the ranks of the upper cultivators. He couldn't change the deep-rooted habits of the entire sect. Not to mention him, even the perfected Lord was the same. This kind of outstanding talent with limitless potential, but because of all kinds of messy reasons, he couldn't get along with the sect and blend in with them. It was a pity. You go and rest for a few days. Later, I'll discuss it with the other Taoists. We'll give you a reward worthy of you. Lu Xiaoyi gave his thanks and retreated, swaying back to his own cave. He needed to sort out his thoughts and establish a force. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before, but now it came so suddenly. He needed to think about it thoroughly. What was his goal? Of course, it couldn't be to survive. It also wasn't for the inheritance of the shaking shadow realm, but for some unspeakable goal. Then, how to establish a force in a secretive manner while completely achieving his goal was a test. At the very least, when he gathered this group of people to fight with some Zhou Xian forces, they couldn't have any hesitation. How to control them? Only the so-called sword heart. This was too unreliable. He wouldn't put his trust in other people's self-awareness. There was one very important point. There were many late-stage Jin Dan among the scattered swordsmen. This meant that there were a few lucky ones among them who could reach the nascent soul stage and walk ahead of him. If that really happened, how should he deal with it? How should he achieve a balance among the various forces in Zhou Xian without implicating the future of the universe? He couldn't lose the sharpness of the swordsman's iron-blooded spirit, and he couldn't make everyone his enemy. This was also a test of his leadership wisdom. How should he obtain the sword technique inheritance? Xuan Yuan's core secret techniques couldn't be passed down, and Xiao Yao's Sparrow Palace couldn't be revealed. The only things that could be passed down were the things that he had comprehended himself. Then, how should he combine his comprehensions into a system so that others could see the possibility of success, the process of improvement, and the steps that couldn't be repeated over and over again? There were too many things. Thinking about it made his head hurt. Chapter 861. He didn't know how Ili communicated. Lu Xiaoyi thought that it would only take a few days, but there was still no news after a month. One day, someone was banging on the door of the cave abode. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Walking out of the cave abode, he was greeted by a furious senior apprentice, Sister Kawa. Senior apprentice sister? What's wrong with you? Who dares to bully you? Tell me. I'll wring his head off and make it your chamber pot. Kawa's eyes widened. It's your ear. What, wring your head off? I'm lacking a chamber pot. Lu Xiaoyi laughed along. That's not good, is it? I'm afraid that if I become a chamber pot, Senior Apprentice Sister will be too shy to pee. Why don't you wring it off? My chamber pot is a self-propelled one and can clean itself. It doesn't even need toilet paper to clean for its owner. Kawa was angry and amused at the same time. She couldn't help but scold. Nothing good comes out of dog's mouth. Let me ask you, at the Red Hill Red Earth Chamber of Commerce, why did you ignore me? I waved my handkerchief so conspicuously, but you didn't even look and turned to leave. What's the meaning of this? Lu Xiaoyi cried out in grievance. I really didn't see you. I was leading people to fight then. Too many things happened. There were hundreds of Jin Dan, then Yuanying and perfected lords. You know all about it. How could I have the time to see someone waving her handkerchief among thousands of people? Well, Senior Apprentice Sister, the way you waved your handkerchief is also wrong. I suggest that you observe how people at Fenghua Brothel do it. You need to be flirtatious, have body movements, twist your hips, and so on. How is that waving your handkerchief? It's more like throwing out spirit tools and talismans, okay? Seeing that Kawa was about to get angry again, he hurriedly pulled her into the cave abode and said mysteriously, "Something big happened. Do you want to hear?" Sure enough, this was a miracle cure for women's anger. Kawa tilted her head. "What big thing? If you dare to change the subject, I'll beat you up." Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. "Look, senior sister, you boast about your connections in the sect. Nothing can escape your eyes and ears. You don't even know about such a big matter? Regarding the master of the shaking shadow realm, the inheritance of the sword vein, the true lord's request. I, your junior brother, am going to be the master of a continent. At that time, you will have many wives and concubines and countless concubines in the harem. It's not easy to give you the main wife, but it's not a problem to give you a concubine. You should prepare more dowry. The grassroots team lacks resources." Kawa was dumbfounded. This change was completely out of her expectations, and she forgot about this guy's glib tongue. "Really? There was such a major event? I was completely in the dark." Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "Why would I lie to you? You were there at the time as well. How could it be me who sent out that sword strike that killed a true monarch? If that was the case, the cultivation world would be in chaos. But senior sister, don't spread this out. I'm still waiting for the letter. I don't know if such a trivial matter is worth discussing for a month or so." Jiahua was about to run out to gather information when she stopped. She knew that it was not appropriate. She really did not have such long ears for the shady dealings between true monarchs. Looking at this cheeky guy in front of her, she sighed inwardly. She had thought that she could monitor this guy for a while, but in such a short time, he had done something earth-shattering again. The battle between the Bitter Zen Temple and the Sword Vein in the Shaking Shadow Little Continent had already spread throughout the 3,000 little continents. She did not know what the upper sect was thinking, but those unorthodox sects were abnormally excited, as if they had been injected with chicken blood. A single spark could start a prairie fire. This provided a realistic version of how the unorthodox sects resisted the upper sect's oppression. Its influence was far-reaching. Who knew how many unorthodox sects were rubbing their palms and secretly colluding with each other? So it was hard to say whether this guy's actions were meritorious or not. But she had to admit that to be able to carry 2 flags and confront hundreds of bitter Zen monks, who could compare to this kind of boldness and ability? "You're amazing now. Your name is known all over the world. Everyone says that Zhou Xian's face in the upper realm has finally been fixed. It's just that your ear is a little disfigured." Lu Xiaoyi was a little wary. It sounded like something like a ranking. He had had enough of this kind of thing in the 5th ring and did not want to experience it again. "What's that? Does it have anything to do with me?" Kawa sighed softly. "You really bury your head in practicing the sword and don't care about the world. Spiritual Mountain has the eye of the sun and moon of the upper realm. Clouds see boundless snorts. Cultivate the true sending message lips. One of your ears was bitten off by a donkey." This was a saying that had recently spread. There were only 4 cultivators in the core formation realm who could cross realms in order to slay them. Congratulations on being on the list. Lu Xiaoyi was furious. Who made this up? Why did it become being bitten by a donkey when it came to me? How disrespectful. Kawa laughed. "I don't know. Anyway, that's what everyone is saying. You've offended the Buddhist system and wiped out the Chamber of Commerce system. These 2 systems are the largest in the upper realm of Zhou Xian apart from the Taoists. What can you do if they deliberately spread this? 1 ear. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame your name. Of all things, why did you have to be called 1 ear?" Lu Xiaoyi was a little unhappy. In his life, other things were fine, but he had always been at a disadvantage when it came to his name and nickname. He had never been normal. Could it be that the heavenly axiom saw that he was too outstanding and deliberately wanted to balance him out? Kawa's mood changed very quickly. Because of this huge matter, she had long forgotten why she was angry. It was nothing more than running around without any results. She was killed indiscriminately by this guy, without any care. There was no need to investigate. He had directly wiped out the Chamber of Commerce. This kind of character was really rare in Zhou Xian. That perfected lord was right. He was too unreasonable. 1 year, I think what you should learn the most now is the organization structure of a sect, the ranks of positions, the rules of rewards and punishments, and various functions. You're too lacking in this area. Basically, you don't know anything. Why don't you copy a copy of the rules of Xiaoyao? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Why would I copy it? I don't want to turn Xiaoying into Xiaoyao. It's so boring. Drink big bowls of wine, eat big chunks of meat, divide souls on a scale. Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will die. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is still mine. We're all brothers. What rules do we need? Kawa was speechless. Was this the rhythm of a mountain king? It was also in line with this person's nature. She just didn't know what kind of state of good land would be ruined by him. Forget it. I don't care about you. You can do whatever you want. I just don't know if the sect is prepared to expel you completely or to keep your qualification as Xiaoyao mask. I guess you can't get rid of your identity as a Xiaoyao disciple. The sect won't casually push people with potential out. Also, you have to leave a room for me in the Xiaoying Sword Palace. I heard that the autumn there is very beautiful, like a phantom. When I have time, I'll go there to enjoy the autumn. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Okay, no problem. I'll arrange the east, south, west, north, and spring palace. It should be enough, right? Will it be too tiring? Chapter 862. The reason why Lu Xiaoyi's arrangement was delayed was that his origin was somewhat special. Originally, this trivial matter wasn't so troublesome. A few freedom immortals could completely make the decision. No matter how outstanding he was just a Jin Dan. Whether or not he could become a nascent soul was still uncertain. What was there to be reluctant about letting one out of thousands of Jin Dan? It wasn't a revolution, and the sequence was still in freedom wandering. It was just a kind of external release. There were many such cases in freedom wandering. Some were released to other small continents, and some were even released to a small star area outside the universe. The only difference was that his power was somewhat special, and he had a large number of individual swordsmen under him. For the higher-ups of freedom wandering, this was a good opportunity to influence a small continent, and they were willing to do it. The problem was that the person who recommended him had a very special position in the Carefree Travel sect. He was a person who meant what he said. They had to be careful about everything related to this Almighty because Almighty people had bad tempers. This powerful person wasn't in freedom wandering now, but in the universe. Fortunately, he didn't go too far this time, so they could still contact him remotely. However, the time was a bit uncertain. This was why Lu Xiaoyi thought this trivial matter was delayed for so long. Immortal Yi Li had already left. He had important things to do in the universe, and he also needed to make arrangements for Yaoing. He couldn't wait in freedom wandering all the time. On the contrary, it would appear that he was too eager. On this day, a message came from outer space. A few immortals from Freedom Hall looked at it with their divine senses. It clearly said, "Can help." They exchanged glances. Sure enough, the relationship between this single-eared and the ancestor was very unusual. Generally speaking, a word "can" was enough to express one's attitude. The addition of the word "help" was unusual. It was help, not help. In the language system of the cultivation world, this was support. It was completely the rhythm of freedom wandering's own important matter. Although they didn't quite understand why, the ancestor must have his reasons for saying so. The Sun Spirit Immortal was far-sighted, and these low-level immortals couldn't compare with him. A immortal said, "Let's call him in. Since the old ancestor has said so, this matter should not be delayed. However, to what extent our support will be, everyone must first come up with a charter." Lu Xiaoyi finally received the news. Half a month had already passed. When he walked into the Great Freedom Hall, he saw a row of perfected ones and perfected ones, as if they were holding a meeting. However, he was already used to such big occasions. He was not afraid when he was in the Foundation establishment stage. When he was in the Jin Dan stage, he dared to release his flying sword in front of them, so he did not mind. Taoist Master Zhao opened his mouth and said, "Perfected Lord Yi Li has discussed this matter with us. Since we are both from the Taoist lineage, there is no difference in distance. After helping the chessboard for the first time, we naturally cannot give up halfway. Now that Yao Ying is in danger, it is necessary to send you to preside over it. What we want to know is your attitude. Lu Xiaoyi said in fear and trepidation. This disciple will listen to the sect. For the unity of Taoism, for the harmony of Zhou Xian's upper realm, and for the prosperity of the universe's cultivation world, I'm willing to pave the way for you. A true monarch laughed. Good ambition. The prosperity of the universe's cultivation world? I don't even dare to think about it. First you worry about the true monarch's worries, and then you rejoice in the perfected one's happiness. Put away your pretentious act. I just want to know, do you want to go? Why do you want to go? What good will it do you? Lu Xiaoyi was not disappointed. Flattery was just empty words. If it went well, there would be benefits. If it went wrong, it did not matter. He just had to wipe away the sh*t. He was already used to it. This disciple wants to go. Firstly, it is because of Senior Yi's request. He saved this disciple's life in Red Hill. Secondly, this disciple was born in the sword vein. I'm afraid this disciple will not be able to change in this lifetime. So, I want to do something for the sword vein. Thirdly, this disciple likes to kill. When cultivating the sword vein, there is no danger, and I don't want to live in peace in Carefree Mountain. The true monarch did not speak any further. This was a crude embryo. He did not match the principles of the Carefree Wanderer at all. What did the old ancestors see in him? Taoist Master Zhao said amiably, the sect has reached a consensus regarding Yi Li's request. I'll explain it to you. If you have any questions, you can raise them in court and we can discuss them again. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was one of the good things about the Carefree Wanderer. It respected the voice of individual cultivators and did not force the hardliners. This was the reason why, although he had not completely integrated into the sect, he had not strayed too far from it. Taoist Master Zhao raised a finger. This is the first condition. As a Carefree Wanderer disciple, this will never change, even if you have another identity in the shaking shadow realm. As a reward for carrying out the mission of the Heaven and Earth chessboard, your Carefree Mask qualification will change from reserve to official. You will have the right to use the Carefree Mask. In view of the difference in strength between you and the other cultivators, you will be the leader of the Carefree Mask. Do you think the sect's arrangement is fair? Lu Xiaoyi blushed with shame. Fair. Disciple has done many things for the sect and has obtained many benefits. I shouldn't ask for this or that, but Disciple still wants to say that I can forget about being the leader. Disciple may frequently run between the Carefree Wanderer and Shaking Shadow Realm in the future. Isn't being the leader inappropriate? Also, this name is strange. A male escort is a male escort. I don't care too much about it, but what does a male escort mean? Taoist Master Zhao laughed. The name can be changed, but don't decline. With the way my Carefree Wanderer operates, there is no need for you to worry about daily matters. If there is nothing to do, then let's part. If there is something to do, we will meet again. If there is a masked operation, then we will need a male escort to control it. You have talent in battle, so you must use this characteristic. Lu Xiaoyi could only accept helplessly. He had the characteristic of a male escort. How come he did not know? Taoist Master Zhao raised a second finger. As for the second condition, the sect will agree to True Lord Yi Li's request in principle. We will allow you to establish Shaking Shadow Realm on your own and promote the spirit of the sword vein. Because there's a 500-year gap, in order to prevent you from leaving behind any excuses in the Buddhist sect, we will not ask you to promote Carefree Wanderer. In order to show our support, the sect will tilt its resources towards Shaking Shadow Realm. As for the specifics, we will discuss them in detail later. In terms of personnel, we will not be stingy. Considering that Shaking Shadow Realm has just suffered a calamity and that there is a decline in talent, the sect has decided that from Carefree Mountain's Jindan Swordsman Group, you will choose 10 swordsmen from Carefree Mountain's Swordsman Group and bring them to Shaking Shadow Realm. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. This was openly mixed with sand. It was a dignified decision, but he could not refuse. Otherwise, what would these old foxes think? What? Were they trying to create an independent kingdom and live separately? Thus, he was moved to tears. Many thanks to the sex support. Talented people are what Shaking Shadow Realm lacks the most. With the sex support, this disciple will definitely take care of Shaking Shadow Realm and let them know that this land is not only Taoist land, but also carefree wanderers' territory. Chapter 863. Taoist Master Zhao was very satisfied. Regardless of whether this guy was real or not, there was nothing wrong with this attitude. In the hundreds of thousands of years of history of the Xiaoyao sect, there were countless small lands that had been gained and lost in the course of history. How could there be a missing Yao Ying land that was floating outside? The third point is about the relationship between Yao Ying and Xiao Yao. On the surface, Yao Ying is independent and has the right to decide the fate of the land. I, Xiao Yao, will not interfere. However, if it involves the great discussion of the Zhou Upper Realm, we still hope that Yao Ying and Xiao Yao can stay in line. In the years to come, at the nascent soul and true monarch levels, Carefree will protect Yao Ying from all kinds of attacks until you can truly stand on your own 2 feet. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Xiaoyi praised him for his wisdom and was very grateful. In fact, these points of Xiao Yao were beyond his expectations. The conditions were more generous than he had imagined, and the protection was also very good. Especially the third point, which was something that Jin Dan of Yao Ying could not accept. He thought that this was because Ili had a close relationship with the supreme Xiao Yao, but he did not know that this was actually a sentence from the white-browed young god who had captured him to Xiao Yao. Taoist Master Zhao smiled and nodded. These were the results of the discussion of this group of Taoist masters. They were indeed greatly influenced by the young god ancestor. Otherwise, how could they be so generous? Now that we've finished talking about the level of power, let's talk about you. The sect has already lifted the seal on your martial arts. If you want to learn anything, go ahead. However, there's one thing. The reason why you were able to gather such a group of individual swordsmen in Yao Ying was probably because they wanted to learn swordsmanship from you. Your own fortuitous encounter and comprehension is up to you. However, regarding Xiao Yao's martial arts, you still have to abide by the rules of the cultivation world. This will never change. It is the cornerstone of the sect's power. Do you understand? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There was no need for anyone to teach him this. Every cultivator who walked on the path of cultivation understood that there were many rules in the world of cultivation. There were all kinds of strange rules. However, there was one thing. The core inheritance of a sect was forbidden for being passed down privately. This was a great crime. Taoist Master Zhao softened his tone. I've been wandering freely for hundreds of thousands of years and have never been a stingy orthodoxy. Other than the core cultivation techniques and spells, 90% of the collection can be passed down to outsiders. Which one can and which one can't. In fact, you're very clear about it. Seeing that he had left the Great Freedom Hall, the few perfected and perfected immortals chatted for a while before dispersing. With different realms, their perspectives were naturally different as well. Something that could not be more important to an individual cultivator, Jin Dan swordsman, was very boring in their eyes. One of the 3,000 Jin Dan's little Lu had some unforeseen circumstances. What would happen if one of the thousands of Jin Dan's little Lu was released to preside over the overall situation? What would it affect? Yes, the flap of a butterfly's wings could cause a storm thousands of miles away. However, this was only a theoretical possibility. In reality, in most cases, the situation in the world of cultivation had its own internal rules. There were too many simultaneous events that could offset this kind of flap. In the end, a flap was just a flap. Lu Xiaoyi left the Great Freedom Hall. There was no need to look for anyone. Not far from the hall, a beautiful figure appeared in front of him. This senior martial sister was good at everything, but she had a heart for gossip. She was as fierce as a tiger. There was nothing that she did not want to know. Hence, he waved his hand. Kawa pretended to be reserved and floated over. She seemed to be unwilling, but in fact, her ears were perked up. Senior martial sister, you're here? Great, I don't have to look for you. Quick, Give me a copy of the information on all the swordsmen in Xiao Yao Mountain. I want to pick someone. Kawa was still being stubborn. Why should I help you? Don't I cultivate myself? If you want to cultivate, why are you here perking up your ears? Lu Xiaoyi laughed secretly. First, if you don't help me, I won't tell you the hall's decision. You still have to trouble yourself to find out. Second, if you want to reserve a room in Yaoying Sword Palace, you have to do something, right? In fact, for this kind of thing, he could directly go to the relevant hall. With the promise of the sect, this was official business. However, because it was official business for someone like him who had no connections in Xiaoyao Mountain, it was very likely that he would be put in a difficult position. Not on the surface, but under the surface, it was perfunctory. Therefore, letting Kawa, a female cultivator with connections in Xiaoyao Mountain, to do it was not only faster, but also more comprehensive. Sure enough, that afternoon, Kawa sent a jade slip to his cave residence. Seeing that she did not leave, Lu Xiaoyi felt very strange. Senior Marshal's sister, do you want to stay here for the night? Kawa had long been immune to this. She smiled and said, I'll help you choose. There are a lot of shady situations that you don't know and don't explicitly state in the information. I have insider information. Lu Xiaoyi was very dafa. Okay, this time I'll choose according to Senior Marshal's sister's recommendation. I admire Senior Marshal's sister's vision the most. It's much better than Fan Tong and the others. Jiahua was very pleased to hear this. She really liked the feeling of being in charge and being in charge. 10 people would be transferred to the distant Yao Ying under her suggestion, and she would make the decision. This gave her a great sense of accomplishment. Therefore, she sat up straight and still. There are a total of 179 cultivators in Xiao Yao Mountain who practice the way of the sword. In the total of 5,000 Xiao Yao Jindan cultivators, excluding the majority who practice the Xiao Yao martial arts, there are more people involved in the unorthodox path. Among them, there are actually some who practice both sword and magic. I know your temperament. You definitely won't like this kind of impure swordsman. Why don't we just cross them off? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Senior Marshal's sister knows me best. That's exactly the case. If they don't focus on the way of the sword, they'll be separated from the others if they go to the Yaoying Sword Palace. There's no need to go through this kind of trouble. Kawa used blue ink to cross off a few dozen people from the jade slip. Then, there are still 123 people who focus on the way of the sword. Of these 123 people, Lu Xiaoyi interrupted her. Why don't we just use the method of elimination? First, we'll find those who have a bad track record, disregard the rules of the sect, are aggressive, and have strange behavior. Kawa gladly complied. Exactly. If these people go to your place, they'll definitely cause a ruckus in the Yaoying Sword Palace. This kind of range, let me think. There should be around 17 or 18 people. She used red ink to cross off another 10 people from the jade slip. Just as she was about to continue, she was interrupted by Lu Xiaoyi. Senior Marshal's sister, how about I invite you to Jichuan Brothel to eat roast duck? Right now is the time when the ducks are fat. Let's also invite Fan Tong, Zhuo Li, and the others. We haven't had a gathering in a while, right? Kawa was very dissatisfied. One ear, what kind of work attitude is this? Things have just started and you're already thinking about eating and drinking. Do you still need to eat and drink? You should at least choose a rough range. Everyone's temperament, personality, cultivation, strength, faction, etc. It's very troublesome. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. It's not like we're choosing a wife. Why would it be so troublesome? Even if we choose from thousands of people, we might not be able to pick everyone right. I'm not choosing. Later on, I'll choose from the 10 or so crooked melons and split dates. It can be considered as reducing the burden on the sect. Chapter 864. In order to lighten the burden on Xiao Yao Yu, Lu Xiaoyi deliberately picked 10 so-called crooked melons and cracked dates. He didn't look at their cultivation, strength, or misdeeds. He just wanted to see if these people ignored the rules of the sect. There were thousands of cultivators in the free wandering sect, and there were definitely some who were mischievous. To be able to choose the way of the sword, they must be mischievous and independent, doing things their own way. Of course, he did not do this to reduce the burden, but to better control them. For those who learn the way of the sword, if you beat them into submission, they would naturally listen to you, unless one day you could no longer suppress them. However, Lu Xiaoyi was confident that even if he taught them, they would never be able to surpass him. Therefore, when the 11 of them stepped into the spatial rift, the Yuanning on duty was very strange. Among the 11 of them, 10 of them had bruises all over their bodies. Their injuries were not light. Of course, this was not a problem for the Jindan. This was Lu Xiaoyi's method. First beat them into submission, then teach them. These people basically did not care about the old rules and customs. Now was the time to solidify and deepen these habits. When it was really useful, there would not be so many scruples. A month later, they arrived at the shaking shadow continent. Although he had participated in the heaven and earth chessboard in the sea of clouds outside the shaking shadow continent, this was the first time he had actually entered the shaking shadow continent. The scenery was magnificent, and there was a sense of desolation. This place was not bad. When the group arrived at the shaking shadow sword palace, there were already swordsmen coming out to welcome them. At first glance, he was shocked. There were more than 100 of them. Song Rong regretfully said, "Time is still a little tight. Otherwise, we could have found more. However, we will abide by the rules of Senior Brother. We are all trustworthy swordsman brothers. We are all good men and have no worries." Looking at the fervent eyes of the crowd, Lu Xiaoyi felt that the burden on his shoulders was a little heavy. He knew very well that in terms of loyalty, most of these people did not have it. They were all determined Jindan stage cultivators. How could they be so hot-blooded? Why would others follow him as soon as he made a call? He needed a goal, a temperament, and a belief to slowly integrate them. As for now, he was still far from tying them into a rope. However, to be able to gather here was a good start. There was a limitless future ahead of them. At the very least, he had something that could attract them. Swordsmanship. When did he stop talking about swordsmanship? If he could make these people treat this place as their home or treat him as their leader, then they would truly be a whole. Only in this way could he make use of these people to achieve his personal goals. He had been in the Zhou Xian upper realm for decades, so he was very clear about the cultivation situation here. He knew that even if he became a nascent soul or a monarch, he might not be able to get in touch with the true core secrets of the Zhou Xian upper realm. This was because he came from an unorthodox family, so the real schemes of the 9 upper sects would not be easily revealed. Unless, in addition to his own strength, he also had a direct attack force. Only in this way would others have no choice but to take him into consideration when making plans. He needed time. Only when Yuanning emerged from this group of people and displayed their strength on various stages, such as the Shaoying single ear, could he truly enter the ranks of the important people in the Zhou Xian upper realm. He left the matter of settling down to Songrong, Xie, and the others. These were the few that he could completely trust at the moment. He himself flew towards the tallest building in the Shaoying mountain, the Shadow Sword Palace. There was still a Shaoying, Yuanning swordsman left here. Although Ili had already handed the Shaoying Sword Palace over to him, it was still important to obtain the support of the Zhenren who was stationed here. This was because in the Shaoying Sword Palace, there was still a large number of Foundation establishment swordsmen. It was not just these 100 or so Jindan who could dominate the world. After all, the power of a sect was a systematic project. Before he even got close to the Shadow Sword Palace, a flying sword shot out from the Sword Palace. Its aura was sharp, and it did not hold back. Lu Xiaoyi did not find it strange at all. His head was exposed, and the flying sword flew straight towards him. There was no fancy technique at all. It was a head-on collision of strength. Under the watchful eyes of the 100 or so Jindan swordsmen below, this was like a clash between the old and the new in the sword vein. Tradition, upright and upright. Revolution, full of vigor. The swordsmen below were mesmerized by this sword fight. They once again experienced Senior Shan swordsmanship. It was a swordsmanship that could change the direction of the sword vein. Even when he was facing off against a Yuaniing swordsman, he was not at a disadvantage at all. When the swords of both parties began to diverge, the old swordsman's sword began to slowly fall into a disadvantageous position. Although his cultivation base was far superior, the strength that he could add to his flying sword was not as comprehensive as Lu Xiaoyi's. This was the result of being stuck in one's ways and not seeking change, sticking to the old ways and clinging to the ways of the ancestors. The swords retracted, and Lu Xiaoyi stepped into the Shadow Sword Palace. He bowed. "Thank you for your help, Senior." He knew that the old swordsman did not use his full strength. At least, he did not use his full strength in terms of cultivation base. The old swordsman shook his head. "I can't catch you. Even if I use my full strength, it will still be the same. What's the point?" The two of them discussed the details of the handover of the Shadow Sword Palace. It involved many aspects and far exceeded Lu Xiaoyi's expectations. Lu Xiaoyi's expression was very sincere. "Senior, the Sword Palace's inheritance is still mainly based on the shadow-shaking realm. I might add some other things, but my things aren't systematic yet. You know that many of them were obtained by chance, so they can't be replicated. The entire Shadow Sword Palace's system will change over a long period of time and cannot be achieved overnight. But there is one thing, and that is that the Shadow Sword Palace will always be the Shadow Sword Palace. This will not change. Our shortcoming is in controlling the spread of the land's orthodoxy. This is something that we need the support of the Shadow Sword Palace. As you know, these new swordsmen are all used to being wild. They are hot-blooded and willing to work hard for the sword vein, but they are a little reckless in their actions. Perhaps the way they do things does not conform to the old rules. I hope that Senior can give us some advice. You can't just ignore it." The old swordsman nodded bitterly, but he was very open-minded. "You don't have to follow the old rules too much. In fact, the Shadow Sword Palace has been following the old rules for tens of thousands of years, but they're barely holding on in the cracks between the monks and Taoists. They have not been able to carve out their own path, and in the end, they have fallen to their current state. This proves that our methods may not be correct. It's just a matter of time. This is just an eruption of pent-up frustration. The result shows that regardless of whether we win or lose, we have lost. In the face of the size of the upper sect, any resistance is just a way to wear them down. How can we wear them down? Your method may be correct, at least in one direction. If we don't improve the individual strength of the swordsman by leaps and bounds, anyone can step on us and do whatever they want. The Bitter Zen Temple only lost about 100 people in the chessboard of heaven and earth. Of course, they don't care. If they knew that they would lose more than half of their people in this battle, would they still fight for the chessboard? Would he still unscrupulously promote faith in Yao, in Little Lu? In the end, it's just a matter of strength. This is the essence of the cultivation world. Chapter 865. In front of Lu Xiaoyi, there were two important directions. One was how to eliminate the deep-rooted influence of Buddhism on the small continent, and the other was how to set a direction for the swordsmen to improve themselves. As for the former, he was not prepared to interfere. He would leave it to his Jin Dan subordinates to take care of their own areas. He could not underestimate this group of fellows. They were all experienced and knowledgeable cultivators who took pride in roaming the world. After so many years of dealing with Buddhism, each of them had some tricks up their sleeves. If he let them do it, it might not be any worse than if he did it himself. His main focus was still on martial arts. He needed to carefully organize his swordsmanship system, list out a skill tree, and then remove the part about Xian Yuan and the part about Xiao Yao Yu. Then he would see how much was left. The result was very awkward. The skill tree was no longer a skill tree, and only a few broken branches were left. After pondering for a few days, he realized that no matter how much he added, it was impossible to recreate this skill tree without the support of Xian Yuan and Xiao Yao. He could not use random things to make up the numbers, or it would affect the overall effect. This only proved that his current knowledge, skills, and experience were not enough to create a system. His current height was because he was standing on the shoulders of giants. When the giants were gone, his height would not be worth mentioning. Furthermore, he was only at the Jindan realm. He was clueless about the realms above the Jindan realm. If he were to create a system now, there was a high possibility that it would be overthrown when he reached the next realm. The conclusion was that the creation of a swordsmanship system should be a problem that could only be considered by a supreme. Lu Xiaoyi felt that it was better to be realistic. Increasing the strength of a swordsman from a single point of view would be more effective and more targeted. Furthermore, the roots of these 100 swordsmen were too heterogeneous. It was a mess from the very beginning. He needed to study the skills of the Yaoying Sword Palace. After all, the Yaoying Sword Palace was the only skill that he could use openly, and it could directly lead to the Great Tao. After a round, he came back. He was very happy that he was able to maintain a good relationship with the old swordsman. Who knows, he might even have to ask the old swordsman to give them a lesson. A few days later, 133 swordsmen gathered at the Shadow Sword Palace, including the 10 from Xiaoyao and the few from Yaoying Sword Palace. There were only 2 people on the main stage, Lu Xiaoyi and Old Yuanying. Lu Xiaoyi coughed softly. I know that there are 2 reasons why all of you are gathered here. The first is for the sake of the Sword Vein's legacy. The second reason is very straightforward. You want to become stronger. But if you think about it carefully, the second reason is more important. You're all people who don't wake up early without benefits, so I won't talk about responsibilities and ideals with you. If I talk about these things with you, it's very likely that I have nothing left to teach you. Everyone laughed. Senior Marshal Brother Shan's opening speech was very much to their liking. There were no empty words. For cultivators like them who wandered the world alone, they hated these kinds of things. There's nothing in this world that comes for free. Yaoying's legacy is like that, and so is my swordsmanship. So if you want to learn it, you have to think about the price you have to pay. It could be life. Only life is worth me imparting my knowledge to you. It's hard to get off my boat once you get on it. This is not a threat, but it's more than a threat. Everyone listened attentively. Actually, this was what they were thinking. They also did not believe that Senior Marshal Brother Shan would be so noble as to be willing to give up everything he had just to help a declining sword vein. He must have a motive, but what was it? No one knew. Life was not the most important thing to them. To be able to wander the world alone and face life on their own, it was impossible for them to do so. With their strength, joining a sword vein was very easy. If they chose to wander, there must be a reason for it, because they felt that the skills of the sword vein were not enough for them to exchange their freedom. But now, Senior Marshal Brother Shan's swordsmanship was worth it. Even if they could not learn all of it, as long as they learned a part of it, it would be enough for them to be reborn. I don't know when I will need you to pay the price. It could be decades or centuries or even longer. If you can't reach the upper level of Yuanying, you may not be able to wait your entire life. I only need you to remember this. Before that, you will still have the freedom to come and go in the Yaoying Sword Palace. I don't care what method you use to get rid of the Buddhist beliefs, but within 100 years, I hope to see a simple Yaoying little Lu and not a street full of people chanting Amitabha. The more they heard, the more shocked they were at Senior Marshal Brother Shan's grand scheme, waiting for them to become Yuanying before they could be of use. That meant that this was no longer a simple dispute within the realm. What was it? Lu Xiaoyi stopped before going too far. If he said too much, he would be exposed. Now was the best time to let people think that he was just trying to establish a unique swordsman orthodoxy. This was not unusual among the 3,000 side sects in the upper realm of Zhouxian. Although the upper realm of Zhouxian was more stable, the real stability was the 9 great upper sects. The 3,000 side sects changed frequently. There would always be a new force emerging, and there would always be sects that would gradually decline. Regarding the cultivation in the Yaoying Sword Palace, I will divide it into 2 aspects. Firstly, regarding the cultivation method. Everyone's cultivation method came from different sources. It is possible that some people's cultivation method came from the upper sects and has a foundation, but most people's cultivation method is probably not up to standard. To be able to rely on your cultivation method to reach this level, you are all one in a million geniuses. But there is no such thing as a genius forever. If you rely on your cultivation method to reach the next level, the chances are not high. Today is a chance to reconnect with your fundamental cultivation method. The Yaoying Sword Palace's quenching jade technique is a direct path to Tao. It is up to you whether you want to learn it or not. What I want to remind you is that if you want to change your cultivation method, the sooner the better. You are all cultivators with hundreds of years of experience. You do not need anyone to teach you this. Every morning, Taoist Master Mao will talk for half a day in the Yaoying Sword Palace. He can help you understand this quenching jade technique at the fastest speed and also build a stronger foundation for you. This was the foundation. The higher the level, the more important it was. Not only was it related to the upper realm, it was also related to the cultivation of swordsmanship. There were many things that could not be done without a strong foundation. For example, the condensation of mana and the strength of one's spirit. They were all mature Jindan. He could not force them. He only gave a suggestion. If they insisted, then no one could do anything about it. They still had a lot of time. Most of these Jindan had at least 200 to 300 years of life left. There was still time to change their cultivation method. The key was whether they had the determination to change themselves. Chapter 866. Finally, I want to talk to you about swordsmanship. Lu Xiaoyi's teaching in the shadow-shaking sword palace had officially begun. This was not a recruitment of disciples, but a kind of preaching of the Tao. He also wanted to take this opportunity to see what the results of his set of things would be if they were popularized. If it was effective, he would send it back to Xinyuan if he had the chance. Of course, that was only if he could find his way back home. Regarding swordsmanship, he divided this group of people into two groups. One group was those who had a sword spirit in their flying swords, and the other group was those who didn't cultivate a sword spirit. With a sword spirit, one could use the sword wheel to move towards the Naiwan Palace. There were countless key points and prerequisites. Lu Xiaoyi had spent hundreds of years using the essence of his spiritual power. In fact, it also contained some of Xuanyuan's cultivation of the sword pill and Xiaoyao's cultivation of the sparrow palace. Many of the cultivation theories were closely related. In fact, they couldn't be completely separated. If one really wanted to teach something from Xinyuan and Xiaoyao and didn't want to bring along, then there was no need to teach them anything. Go figure out yourself. For those who didn't have a sword spirit, other than providing them with all kinds of methods to cultivate a sword spirit, he would focus on teaching them in other aspects. For example, the theory of imbalance, the mechanism of the sword wheel's vibration, the control of sword light splitting, the combination of the Tao state and the flying sword, the application of momentum on the flying sword, and his most prized spiritual vibration swordsmanship. Although he no longer used this method, he had changed it to the more advanced Sparrow Palace's big bird wing flapping technique. He didn't treat himself as a teacher, and the other swordsmen didn't treat themselves as students either. They were just a group of people who were obsessed with swordsmanship. There was no hierarchy, no first come first served. Lu Xiaoyi told them everything he knew, and the swordsmen wanted to get to the bottom of it. The teaching was like a discussion. As they discussed, they would fight. When they were tired of fighting, they would continue the discussion. This wasn't a one-sided process. Lu Xiaoyi also benefited a lot from it. With hundreds of swordsmen who didn't have a unique skill, even Lu Xiaoyi could bring out his trump card. So who would have a nerve to hide it? Everyone's unique skill had its own logic. When a master like Lu Xiaoyi saw it and interpreted it in his own way, he would then spread it around and cultivate it. He would then find out what was lacking in his cultivation and improve it through arguments. Naturally, it would become a positive learning process. Everyone was improving. When it came to who benefited the most, it was Lu Xiaoyi, who had the most theoretical and practical experience. For Jindan people like them, the only thing that could move people's hearts was sincerity. Sincerity was mutual. Lu Xiaoyi gave his sincerity and received other sincerity in return. In the future, when these swordsmen grew stronger through mutual stimulation, who would think about who they were fighting for? Was it to repay a certain someone? To treat this place as their home, the home of a swordsman? They would naturally have the determination to protect their home. A real group was beginning to take shape. There were still flaws, and not many results could be seen. But it didn't matter. If this continued, he would really have an unbreakable team. Because this team wasn't formed because of repayment, but because of a common goal and a common pursuit. Half a year later, the back mountain of the Sword Palace had been ruined by these people. A layer of the mountain rocks had been shaved off. There was no vegetation at all, and all living things were dead. Looking at the hundreds of expectant gazes, Lu Xiaoyi scolded. Let's not talk about swordsmanship today. Damn it, it's been half a year and we haven't done anything serious. The problem of the Buddhist faith in Yaoying land hasn't been solved at all. All of them are here. Go out and clean the snow in front of your door. Let's gather again in half a year and expand our thinking at the same time. All the sword cultivators laughed and laughed. To them, staying at the back of the mountain for half a year was something that would have been impossible in the past. But now, this place seemed to have some kind of magic that made them unwilling to leave. Even if they left, they would always think about how to run back. When the sea of swordsmanship was opened up, with Lu Xiaoyi's guidance and the hundreds of swordsmen's imagination, they created countless strange swordsmanship. No one could learn all of them. They could only choose the one that was most suitable for them and train their mind with all their might. In Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship philosophy, he especially emphasized on the mind. His strength also made the swordsmen see the direction of their hard work. It was no longer an illusion, but a reality. The path was right under their feet. The lazy bums had all been forced to leave, leaving him alone. Taoist Master Mao appeared beside him mysteriously. He was a little emotional. As a Yuaning Taoist master, he could also appear among this group of people. Compared to these hotheads in his eyes, the attractiveness of swordsmanship was obvious. Martial Uncle Yi's vision is very accurate. With you in charge of the Shaking Shadow Realm, 100 years later, at the level of Jin Dan, the Shaking Shadow Swordsman will dominate the sword vein of the Zhou Xian Upper Realm. If there's 1,000 years, what will it be like? I really hope to see that day come. Unfortunately, our Shaking Shadow Sword Palace can't do that. We don't have the courage to break the norm, and we don't have the courage to do so. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Senior, this is a special case and cannot be treated as an example. It's the model of breaking and rebuilding. If you don't break, how can you rebuild? We can do this now and maintain it, but it may not be the same when the next Jin Dan joins us. It will gradually weaken until it returns to normal. The normal operations of the sex in the cultivation world have their own inherent patterns. This has been proven over hundreds of thousands of years in the cultivation world. Taoist Master Mao sighed. After talking for so long, you're just saying that dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to children? Then what's the point of doing all this? If you're only strong in this batch, maybe you can continue to be strong in the next few batches. In the end, what's your goal? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Change. Taoist Master Mao was curious. When? Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. Wait. Taoist Master Mao was stunned for a long time. He really couldn't see through this young man. It was as if they were in different worlds. Suddenly, he remembered. Oh, right. There's a female cultivator waiting for you outside the mountain gate. She didn't say her name and covered her face. Lu Xiaoyi complained. Why didn't you say something serious earlier? Why did you have to talk about all this nonsense? Seeing him fly away, the old swordsman laughed. I'm not talking about nonsense. What you're doing now is nonsense. It should be Senior Kawa, right? Coincidentally, he was looking for her to contact the swordsman and buy some resources that he was lacking. It wasn't for him, but for the swordsmen to train their spirit. It wasn't easy to buy them from the market. Moreover, the Chamber of Commerce was treating the swordsmen differently and ignored them. When he arrived at the mountain gate, he saw a slim and graceful figure looking at Yin Chuan. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were sharp. He knew that it wasn't Senior Kawa, but when he got closer, he didn't know how to address her. Why was this woman here? Did he just recover from a shock? Chapter 867. The woman sensed that someone was approaching from behind. She was not surprised. She turned around gracefully and looked over with her watery eyes. She still did not speak. Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. To be honest, although they had been intimate before, strictly speaking, he was seducing her. Sister Bing, why are you here? Xiao Bingji looked at him up and down, left and right. I can't come. Lu Xiaoyi was even more embarrassed. You can come, you can come. If I wasn't afraid that you would be angry, I would have gone to see you earlier. Xiao Bingji asked, why would I be angry? He could not answer this question. Could he say that he had coaxed her when she was young and ignorant? There was no way to say it. The relationship between the two of them was really awkward. That year in rusty little land, they went from being like fish in water to being separated from each other. The recovery of their memories was a good thing for normal people. But for the two of them, it was an extremely awkward situation. Actually, Lu Xiaoyi was not too embarrassed. Which field cannot be sowed? As long as they fulfilled their duty of plowing in spring, it was fine if they watered other people's fields. The problem was that this field might have some thoughts. They might have been prepared to grow naturally for the rest of their lives, coexisting with heaven and earth. But they did not expect that some hard-working farmer would. He had always wanted to know the real thoughts of this woman. If they had such thoughts, they would roll up their bedding and move it to a pile. If they did not have such thoughts, they should not come in front of him for no reason. It was annoying and reminded him of those unbearable memories. Now that this person was here, could it be that she wanted to move her bedding? It did not seem to make sense. What was the reason? Most importantly, this woman had always been calm and rational. Had she changed a little? Had she become a little like Enya? Was it a good thing? Was she shy? Was she embarrassed? Did she need him to speak first? He did not have any psychological burden. There was nothing that he could not say. He walked over slowly and gave her what he thought was the warmest smile. Because he wanted it to be so real, his cheeks twitched a little. He slowly reached out his hand and held the woman's soft hand. Sister Bing, the past. Xiao Bingji stepped back like lightning, looking alert. There is no past. You have to be more respectful. Also, can you not smile like that? Horrifying. Lu Xiaoyi heaved a sigh of relief. What's wrong with me? Had she changed so much that she no longer resembled herself? Wasn't it just planting the wrong field? What's the big deal? He could either continue to plant the wrong seeds or let her grow barren. What was the big deal? Was there a need to be so careful? Shaking his head, he finally regained his senses. Sister Bing, are you here to see me? I am now the ruler of a continent, and the only thing I lack is an empty harem. The east, south, west, and north harem have already been built, and the spring, summer, autumn, and winter harem are still being planned. However, there is no one in the harem, and the east harem still lacks a main concubine. Why don't Sister Bing help me manage the inner harem? Xiao Bingji finally listened to it normally. She herself also felt strange. When this thing spoke properly, she felt goosebumps all over her body. However, when it talked nonsense, she felt comfortable listening to it. What was wrong with it? Did something go wrong? Oh, which palace is Inu in? Lu Xiaoyi smirked, but in Xiao Bingji's eyes, it was much better than his gentle smile. That little girl, what palace? She could just be a maid to accompany you in the room and serve you. Xiao Bingji pointed at him and said, I'll tell Enya exactly what you said. This time, I'm not here for personal matters. I just want to ask you, is there anything else you need in this Yaoying palace? Huangting Taoism doesn't have a swordsman, so they can't send anyone. They can only contribute a little in terms of resources. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Oh, has my Yaoying sword palace become the front line against Buddhism? It's understandable that Xiaoyao helped me, but it's strange that Huangting Taoism also helped me. Will there be other Taoists coming to give me warmth? If that's the case, I have to think about it carefully. They're all here. If I ask for less, won't I be slapping their faces? Xiao Bingji finally recovered her coldness. I'm only responsible for conveying the message, not making the decision. However, if you have any needs, feel free to ask. Huangting will try to satisfy you as long as it's not too much. Lu Xiaoyi was a little disappointed. You really don't care about personal friendship? After all, we've fought together. We're comrades who have gone through life and death together. Don't you want to come in and have a cup of tea? Xiao Bingji said calmly. On the level of Yuanying and true monarchs, Huangting will try to help you resist any possible evil intentions. However, on the level of Jin Dan, you can only solve it yourselves. Lu Xiaoyi was curious. Isn't there a 500-year buffer period? Why? Are the Buddhists not going to admit it? Xiao Bingji said, how dare they not admit it? However, that's only in Yaoying Little Lu. There's no such rule in other Little Lu. Do you sword cultivators have the patience to do that? What's more, he can cultivate for 500 years without ever leaving the house. Lu Xiaoyi understood. She was reminding him that if he left Yaoying Little Lu, there might be unexpected trouble and traps. Understood. Thank you for the reminder. I can make them suffer in the heaven and earth chessboard with just one ear. If it's the real world, they won't be able to bear the consequences. Xiao Bingji didn't continue to persuade him. When it came to fighting and scheming, she couldn't compare to this sinister guy in front of her. Not only was he scheming now that Jin Dan was in his current realm, he was also scheming when he was young and inexperienced. This was a guy who had been scheming since he was young, but she couldn't do anything about it. Ever since Enya returned from Red Hill, she was seriously injured because she used a power that she wasn't familiar with. She has been recuperating in Huangting. At the same time, she was also grounded. She asked me to tell you to visit her when you're free. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. How did you get injured? Wasn't that ability given to her by her elder ancestor? Could it be that she didn't understand it? Or did that nascent soul cultivator do something when she left? Xiao Bingji sighed. There's no problem with the item that her elder ancestor gave her. There's no problem for her to use it herself. But if she wanted to exceed her own ability to take away all three of them, then there's definitely a problem. That's how she got injured. And it's a bloodline injury that's not easy to recover from. That's why it's still not healed up until now. Lu Xiaoyi scratched his head. This little girl had a good heart, but she was a little overconfident. However, he was very hesitant about whether he should visit her or not, because it was obvious that Enya was a more troublesome character than Xiao Bingji. If he got involved with her, he might get involved with something that he didn't want to get involved with. For example, the gaze of a certain true monarch. He couldn't afford to be looked at, let alone checked. Xiao Bingji took out a jade box from her ring and handed it to him. This is yours. Now return it to its rightful owner. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He had already felt this aura when he saw this girl. It was a familiar aura. He gently opened the jade box. A sharp light instantly flew out and entered the top of his head. Chapter 868. This was Zhu Cheng. Xiao Bingji returned his Zhu Cheng flying sword. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi's doubtful gaze, the woman explained, I've asked for this back a long time ago. I never wanted to return it to you. I thought it was a punishment, but you've caused too much trouble in Red Hill. If you really find out which nascent soul cultivator it is, and you go looking for them, do you think you can kill any nascent soul cultivator who's at a higher cultivation level? Now that everything is over, I'm going back. Lu Xiaoyi was a little touched. No matter what, he did not plow the fields for nothing. He also knew that for women, especially arrogant female cultivators, it would take time and opportunity to completely understand this kind of thing. It was okay. Everyone had time. As long as they were willing to study, there would be opportunities. I'll keep the room for you. You can come whenever you want. Also, help me collect some non-course spiritual cultivation methods. I have a use for them. Xiao Bingji looked at him, as if she was puzzled by his request, but she did not say anything. How could you ask a great thief not to take advantage of others? When she entered the crack passage, she realized that she had returned someone else's item, but that guy did not return hers. That jade silkworm pendant. How disgusting must this person be to hold on to someone else's item and not return it? But why did she not think of it? Did she not think of it? Or did she not think of it at all? Was Jin Dan so forgetful? Lu Xiaoyi withdrew his thoughts from women. When it came to matters of the heart, he had to be able to let go of them. In Xuanyuan's words, a real swordsman had to be able to take off his pants and put them back on. Ever since he formed his aura's core, he had been busy and did not seem to have a period of quiet cultivation. This was because of his personality. He could not sit still. It was also because of all kinds of trivial matters. He seemed to be too busy. Now, the urgent problem that needed to be dealt with was gone. The Red Earth Chamber of Commerce had a temporary end, and the reason for Zhu Qing no longer existed. He had no reason to continue causing trouble in the upper realm of Zhou. As for the Sword Spirit Zhu City, it was very troublesome for him to find it. He had to find out who had obtained it, and then go to the sect to ask for it. The process was full of unknowns, and it was impossible for it to be smooth sailing. However, this was very easy for the disciples who had connections and background. For example, Xia Bingji. After she returned, it was easy to determine who had done it through her master. There was always an inextricable connection between the major cultivators of the sect. Whether it was a request or a visit, they had to give each other face. Xia Bingji didn't tell him who attacked him back then. Her meaning was very clear. She didn't want him to act rashly. He was also very clear that in the front line of the Yao Ying sect facing the pressure of the Buddhist sect, it was very unwise for him to expand his negative side. Therefore, he did not pursue the matter further. Some karma was destined to be inextricable. In this world, there was no cultivator who could truly clear karma. It didn't matter if it was others who owed him or himself who owed others. He gently brushed aside this grudge and suffered a loss. However, he continued to take advantage of the woman. It was also a way to maintain a connection. It could make the woman unknowingly unable to cut off this connection. Everyone had their own weaknesses. Xia Bingji's weakness was that she couldn't bear to reject the people who were close to her. This was the reason why Mr. Yin was dragged on for hundreds of years. The difference between Lu Xiaoyi and Senior Yin was that Lu Xiaoyi first plowed the land, and then he began to be shameless. One day, the woman would feel that since he already owed her so much, it didn't matter if he owed her one more time. In the end, the only way to settle the debt was for everyone to sleep together. This was Lu Xiaoyi's special way of getting along with others. When these troubles no longer existed, he began to have time to come up with a plan for himself. The core of the plan was simple: how to continue to improve his cultivation. This was his most urgent need now. He was almost 500 years old now. It had been almost 100 years since he came to the Zhou upper realm. For a cultivator with talent in cultivation, this period of time should be enough for him to break through to the Yuanying stage. Jindan's lifespan was almost 800 years old. Excluding the end of life and considering the complexity of breaking through to the next realm, 200 to 300 years was actually not much. As for him, he was still stuck in the middle of Jindan. He was tied down by a bunch of trivial matters. From the perspective of cultivation, no matter how talented he was in combat, if he could not break through to the next realm, he would be nothing more than a cup of yellow soil. This was why even if he carried the flag on the heaven and earth chessboard, not many people really saw him as a threat. This was how true cultivators saw him. I saw his tall building rise. I saw his wind and clouds follow. I saw his building collapse. I saw his wind and clouds vanish. He still had more than 300 years. Time was a little tight. The key was that he could not go out and play with cats and dogs anymore. The existence of little Lu and Yao Ying gave him this opportunity. If he did not know how to behave himself, he could not blame anyone else. In cultivation, one should let go and let go. Now is the time to let go. He planned to be Duke Lu and Yao Ying for a period of time until he reached the peak of Jindan. "Aren't you going out for a walk?" Taoist Master Mao asked. Lu Xiaoyi's face was full of sincerity. "No, I'll stay here with you. There are still a lot of things that I don't understand." Taoist Master Mao glanced at him. "You're not stupid. You know that your cultivation is not enough. If you go out again, you won't even reach the end of your 500 years in Yao Ying before everyone can collect your corpse." Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "Although my strength in swordsmanship is not bad, my path in cultivation has been awkward. It was like this for Foundation Establishment, Jindan, and now it's the same for Yuanying. I'm curious, how do other people cultivate? It seems like they don't need to deliberately go into seclusion to reach the peak of Jindan." Taoist master Mao reminded him, "Your way of thinking is wrong. In terms of probability, a cultivation speed like yours is a high probability event in the cultivation world. It's just that the people around you are all proud sons of heaven, so you feel that your cultivation speed is too slow. Even if it's a solo swordsman, which one of them isn't a genius from their own small continent. Otherwise, why would they dare to come out and wander around? But you have to remember that everyone has their own rhythm. Some people's cultivation speed is fast, some people's fighting ability is strong, but how many people can achieve both? Under the guidance of the heavenly Tao, nothing is perfect. If you gain something, you will lose something else. This is the basic principle of the heavenly Tao, and we should go with the flow. What I mean is, the more you are in a situation like this, the more you can't be impatient and lose your own rhythm. Calm your mind and cultivate your mind in Yaoing, but don't chase after extra speed. The heavenly Tao has already been very generous to you. Cultivators like us should be content with what we have. Only with a good attitude can everything be natural. At the nascent soul juncture, I've seen too many people suffer a crushing defeat. Most of them have staked it all on a single throw, and very few have succeeded. Those who succeed are those who pursue nature and follow the will of the heavenly Tao. Remember, Yuanying is difficult. It's difficult to become one with the heavens, and it's difficult to become one with nature. You can't rely on your methods, or you'll be at a disadvantage. Chapter 869. Lu Xiaoyi began to cultivate in silence. The old man's words were right, but in the world of cultivation, right and wrong always coexisted. He knew the disadvantages of advancing rashly, so he wouldn't force himself to use extra methods to increase his cultivation. But he also knew the meaning of staking everything on one throw. When he built his foundation, he used an abandoned foot soaking pill to build his foundation, and the symbolic meaning was far greater than the actual meaning. When he was in Jindan, he gambled on the reverse space window, almost forcing himself into a desperate situation. Then, what method would he use in front of the Yuanying? Until now, he still didn't have a clue. However, he subconsciously knew that this was definitely not normal, because the path he had taken to get here was not normal at all. This was not seclusion, but also seclusion. It was just that the location of his seclusion was not the cave, but the entire Yaoying land. He was still discussing the mysteries of swordsmanship with the swordsman, but as time passed, the number of discussions became less and less, but the depth of the discussion became deeper and deeper. Flying swords, after all, were used to practice and not by talking about it. He could see the progress of each of his friends in swordsmanship, and similarly, he could also achieve his own progress through the progress of others. This was a very strange way of cultivating swordsmanship. It was a special environment and special coincidences that formed the special environment of cultivating swordsmanship in the Yaoying land. He still chose to cultivate both his swordsmanship and his cultivation at the same time. He didn't focus on cultivation just because his cultivation was lagging behind, because he knew that this was his own rhythm. Because of the sword, he could achieve a balance in his state of mind during the boring process of increasing his cultivation and not fall into a strange cycle of stagnation in his cultivation. This was efficiency. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that what Taoist Mao was worried about was a state of overflowing cultivation. This state was a special state of cultivation that belonged to Jindan cultivators. It meant that even though one's cultivation had not reached the late stage of Jindan, there would be an increase and decrease in cultivation. It was like a reservoir that was full of water and couldn't be increased anymore. But in reality, this state of full water was an illusion, because a cultivator would advance by leaps and bounds over a long period of time and use external forces to increase their strength. They would be anxious and rush to improve. This would create a false state of full dantian, which would have a great impact on a cultivator. It would even affect a cultivator's self-evaluation of their dantian after reaching the peak. That was why Taoist master Mao reminded him to be natural. Because he had a lot of time, He didn't need to run around for trouble anymore. He finally had time to start his second and third cultivation methods. The second cultivation method, the 5-element shift, had always been in the process of cultivation. It was just that he hadn't practiced it systematically. The third cultivation method, the heavenly heart strategy, was an extreme expansion of the spiritual realm. It was the basic method of Xuan Yuan's internal sword sex killing sect. It included many things that he had never touched before, such as the 3 lives. Why do I have to cultivate all these? This was because before a cultivator became a Yuanying, they had to find a suitable direction for themselves. It was a navigation mark so that the cultivator would not be lost in the sea of cultivation. Many people believe that the Tao realm was something that one would only come into contact with after forming their nascent soul. This wasn't a big mistake. However, the real sects would tell you that the Tao realm had to be done early. It didn't mean that one had to go deep into a certain Tao realm during the Jindan realm. It was impossible to go deep into a certain Tao realm because one's vision of the realm was right there. Even someone as strong as Liu Xiaoyi, who had repeatedly made progress in the 5 elements, was only at the entry level in the eyes of a real cultivator. The key was to determine the direction. Only when the direction was determined would the chances of forming their nascent soul greatly increase. Only then would they be able to solidify this direction in their nascent soul body and become their natal Tao realm. Only then would they be able to make rapid progress in their cultivation after forming their Yuanying. Was it possible to form their nascent soul without a direction in the Tao realm? Of course, it was also possible. However, the process was much more difficult. It would affect the quality of the nascent soul and affect their cultivation after forming their nascent soul. As for the choice of Tao realm, it was not limited to the 36 innate great Taos. It was not limited to the 3,000 unorthodox great Taos. In fact, even the disciples of famous sects rarely used the 36 innate great Taos as their Tao realm choice when forming their nascent soul. It wasn't that it was bad, but it was too good. It was very difficult for good cultivators to reach it. Using the Tao realm to quench one's thirst for plum blossoms to stimulate oneself was very foolish. Therefore, when it came to the choice of Tao realm, many cultivators would choose the one that was most suitable for themselves and the one that was most in line with their hundreds of years of cultivation. The 3,000 great Taos were not a joke. There were only more, not less. Furthermore, the mid-level concepts that could be comprehended during the Jindan realm were the most complicated. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, ice, clouds, and mist, as well as the yellow springs, nether floating, growth, blood river, nether ghost, tide sea, green mountain, long river, bright moon, setting sun, and so on. There were even grand cultivators who joked that everything in the universe could enter the Tao realm. As long as one was immersed in it, every blade of grass, tree, insect, and cicada would be able to comprehend the Tao. It was all up to the cultivator to comprehend it. No one else could help, even if they were master and disciple. Some orthodoxies had a very simple choice at this juncture. For example, the Blood River Orthodoxy. They didn't need to spend so much effort to find what they truly needed. They only had one direction, the Blood River. Success and failure were all because of the Blood River. This was the reason why the Blood River Grand Tao could never become an innate great Tao. It was too exclusive and couldn't tolerate the existence of other Tao realms. For those legacy sects, such as the 5 rings Xinyuan, 3 pure ones, Supreme, Sangha, and the 9 upper sects of Zhou, they all had one thing in common. They never restricted the direction of their disciples' Tao realm choice. They even encouraged their disciples to follow their hearts and seek for new things and changes. This was the style of a true upper sect. Liu Xiaoyi's problem was the choice of Tao realm when breaking through to the Yuanying realm. Was it the 5 elements? Or was it something else? Although he was most familiar with the 5 elements, it didn't mean that the 5 elements were the direction of his Yuanying realm. The reason why he was familiar with the 5 elements was because of many coincidences. It started when Sage Rue pulled him to build the 5 elements Sword Pagoda. Then, What was the most suitable direction for his Tao realm hidden in the depths of his soul? There was still a choice to be made. Or was it the stars? Or was it the slaughter of the sword? Or was it fate? In order to clarify this point, he had to come into contact with more techniques. For example, using the 5 elements shift to determine whether he was most compatible with it. For example, using the heavenly heart strategy to feel his true heart. Find a path for the future in the future of cultivation. There were still 300 years left. There wasn't much time. There were troubles when he was running around. There were troubles when he was concentrating on cultivation. In short, there were endless troubles. After Yao Ying and Little Lu joined the ranks of more than 100 individual swordsmen, the restlessness in the cultivation world finally calmed down. Some small powers that wanted to take advantage of the situation had no choice but to lay low and continue to struggle at death's door. This was because this new batch of swordsmen, Jin Dan, was even more ferocious and fearless than the previous batch. At least for a short period of time, Yao Ying temporarily regained its calm. Chapter 870. Time passed slowly and peacefully. This was because he was immersed in improving his swordsmanship. With hundreds of cultivators from different continents and different orthodoxies as his companions, there was no lack of opponents to fight with. He became familiar with his swordsmanship through fighting and grew through fighting. Although the Yaoying Sword Palace was in a mess, what was surprising was that almost no one left the Yaoying Sword Palace in the past few decades. To these swordsmen who were used to being wild, this was simply inconceivable. However, after 30 years, there were always cultivators who felt that their swordsmanship had reached a high level and could not suppress their restless hearts. Thus, in 2s and 3s, they began their habit of wandering the world again. Lu Xiaoyi did not stop them. He only set a minimum limit for the number of swordsmen who stayed behind in the Yaoying Sword Palace. At the same time, he set a time limit for them to go out 10 years. At the very least, they had to come back after 10 years to take over the brothers who stayed on the continent. In these 30 years, Lu Xiaoyi lived a very leisurely life. His status in the carefree wandering was special. He was the head of the masks, and he led a continent by himself in the Yaoying Sword Palace. Thus, missions were not assigned to him. Furthermore, in these years, Zhou Xian's upper realm was still considered peaceful. There were very few major incidents. However, Lu Xiaoyi was not completely bored in the Yaoying Sword Palace. Every 10 years, he would return to the carefree continent and go to the Great Freedom Palace to show his loyalty and make his presence known. At the same time, he would also bring some things back. However, he would always go through the cracked passageway. He rarely came into contact with people and never went to the Cloud Sea to indulge himself. He was very clear that 30 years might be very long for a mortal, but it was very short for a cultivator. For an upper sect like the Bitter Cicada Temple, the planning time was at least 100 years. Even now, his actions were far from being forgotten, and he could regain his safety. After having fun, he had to restrain himself for a period of time. This was the way for a cultivator to protect himself. This time, he didn't go to carefree travel for 10 years as he had planned. Instead, he was summoned by carefree travel. As for the specific reason, he didn't know. Being summoned once every 30 years wasn't too much, so he had no reason to refuse. After making some arrangements for the Shaking Shadow stage, there wasn't much to worry about. During the 500-year buffer period, the Buddhists wouldn't be able to reach here. The 7 Taoists were all watching. As for some of the Jin Dan level monsters, there was even less to worry about. Dozens of powerful swordsmen and 30 years of honing their skills. Although they still couldn't compare to Lu Xiaoyi, compared to before, their strength had increased by at least a few times. Those who had strong adaptability and a solid foundation could be said to have been reborn. In such a situation, if they were still taken advantage of by intruders, then these people would be better off without them. The feud between the Buddhists and the Sword Vein hasn't ended. It might just be the beginning. Do you understand? Xia, Fei Sha, Nin Dankengrong, and the others all nodded. For decades, they had been taught by Lu Xiaoyi the most. They were also outstanding figures in the chessboard of heaven and earth, so they had also improved the most. Because they had the deepest understanding, they understood the burden on their shoulders better. They were the few who didn't go out of play. They knew very well that managing a continent was actually a part of a cultivator's comprehensive cultivation. Waves had to fly, and sitting had to cause hemorrhoids. That was true cultivation. Carefree travel summoned me. Maybe I'll be back soon, or maybe I'll be delayed for a while. No one can say for sure. Seeing that it's so mysterious, I guess it won't be short. I'll leave the shaking shadow stage to you guys. Whenever there's a problem with Dao Qi, you'll be fine. Xia promised on behalf of everyone. Don't worry, boss. Nothing will happen to the shaking shadow stage. We're not easy to deal with. We know what's important. As for you, boss, once you leave the shaking shadow stage, there won't be any so-called buffer period. You might have no problem attacking the Bodhisattva with your sword, but don't be hot-headed and attack the Buddha. Without you in the shaking shadow stage, everyone will definitely disband. Damn it. Don't you know how to say something nice? Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Don't just focus on practicing the sword. It's useless if you can't improve your realm. Our future is not on this small shaking shadow stage. Be careful of those old foxes from carefree travel. Don't look at how carefree they are. In fact, they're vicious and merciless. Don't be too obedient. You'll suffer. The one who spoke was called Zofan. He was a native carefree cultivator and was also a natural sword seed. He was one of 10 people that Lu Xiaoyi brought from the carefree continent. He had formed his gold core for hundreds of years and spent half of his time in Carefree Mountain reflecting on his mistakes. He hated the old ways of the upper sect. In Kawa's words, this person's cultivation would be abolished sooner or later, and he would quit the mountain. Unexpectedly, he came to the shaking shadow stage like a fish in water. After getting along with him for dozens of years, Lu Xiaoyi thought highly of this rebellious guy. He had a good foundation, so his progress was also relatively fast. After dozens of years, he was also one of the few trusted aides, and his methods were especially ruthless. These people really understood a little of Lu Xiaoyi's thoughts. However, in their opinion, it was possible that their boss's goal was to let the sword vein obtain the same cultivation status as the 9 great upper sects in the Zhou upper realm. This was a group full of ambition, and it was also deliberately created by Lu Xiaoyi. I'm such a good person who is kind to others and cherishes my life. However, I have to get involved in the filth of the cultivation world. Besides, it's so difficult. Under the disdain of his brothers, Lu Xiaoyi left the shaking shadow stage and once again embarked on the journey back. In the Great Freedom Hall, it was still Taoist Master Zhao who received him. Taoist Master Zhao was very satisfied because this guy did not procrastinate. From a schedule, he knew that he had rushed over after receiving news from the sect, which showed his attitude. I asked you to come, but I didn't discuss it with you. Did it delay your cultivation? At least verbally, the carefree elders always tried to consider the feelings of the disciples below. Lu Xiaoyi had long been used to this kind of behavior, so he could not take it too seriously. How is it not cultivation? I haven't been on a mission for 30 years, so I'm a little itchy. Taoist Master Zhao chuckled. With your swordsman's orthodoxy, it's uncomfortable if you don't kill people. The reason why I called you here this time is actually not a mission, but there's a Dharma assembly that you need to participate in. Lu Xiaoyi's face turned bitter. Martial uncle, if you want me to go kill people, no matter how dangerous it is, I won't say a word. However, if you wanted to hold a Dharma assembly, I can't stand that environment. A group of people farting around, making me sleepy. Why don't we change people? We have so many Jean Dan in our carefree group, and there's also Mask and a few others. Their strength might even be above mine. Taoist Master Zhao smiled and shook his head. No, they're calling you by name. How can we change people without permission? Let me tell you, this is not an ordinary Dharma assembly, and the location is not in the Zhou upper realm, but in the famous Taipu realm in the nearby 10 universes. Every 300 years, it's a grand event to raise the younger generation. It's not just our Zhou, but also the various cultivation upper realms in the 10 universes. Ordinary people don't have the qualifications. In the entire Zhou Xian, only 5 Jin Dan have been called, and one of them includes you. Tell me, how should we change people? Chapter 871. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. He had been in Zhou Xian for more than 100 years. When he had nothing to do, he often read the history of the Zhou Xian upper world. This was a way to deeply understand Zhou Xian and also a kind of protection for himself. He couldn't be ignorant and act like an outsider. The Taipu realm, also known as Taiposhi, was a primordial stone from the birth of the universe. After experiencing the vicissitudes of time, this stone drifted in the universe and slowly gained its own intelligence, just like many strange things at the birth of the universe. Therefore, its essence was a primordial spiritual treasure. Primordial spiritual treasures were an indispensable part of the cultivation world of the universe. They were involved in too many things. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't come into contact with them at his level. He could only appreciate their magic in the ancient books of the sect. However, Taiposhi was a relatively special existence among the primordial spiritual treasures. According to the time of its existence, the good ones had already been ranked as immortals. The average ones were at least in the half-immortal realm, and the worst ones were basically wandering around the Yangshan realm. Below that was the world of the acquired spiritual treasures. It couldn't be lower, because it didn't match the status of the primordial spiritual treasures. Taiposhi was different, because its level was always between the half-immortal realm and the Yuanying realm. It was an endless cycle. What was the reason? No one could figure out because no one dared to do anything to it. It was not only because its internal cycle couldn't be changed or stopped, but also because it was supported by a huge group of primordial spiritual treasures. This kind of primordial spiritual treasure contained the magical and mighty power of the universe. It couldn't be taken as one's own. It was impossible for humans to plot against it when it was weak, because when it grew to the Yangshan half-immortal realm, the so-called master would be devoured. It was completely uncontrollable. In the era when it existed, the upper world of Zhou Xian hadn't even been formed yet. The Taipu realm, Taiposhi, and Taipu Lord were all titles for it, but it liked to be called Taipu Immortal the most. Every 360 years, it would complete a cycle of reincarnation from the Yuanying realm to the half-immortal realm. And when Taiposhi returned to the Yuanying realm, it would invite cultivators to go to its Taipu realm to experience the changes of the universe. It had to be said that this was a connate numinous treasure that had a strong Tao heart and was indiscriminate in its teachings. Because they had experienced the birth and changes of the universe, they were willing to show these changes to other living beings. This was almost a common characteristic of connate numinous treasures. However, what was special about Taiposhi was that it was displayed to the insignificant Jindan level of the cultivation world. Pursuing the essence of the universe was the lifelong pursuit of every cultivator at the Yuanying realm and above. However, in the eyes of the connate numinous treasure Taiposhi, since Yuanying cultivators could already travel through the void, this kind of pursuit should be completed by themselves. However, it would only help those Jindan cultivators who were still standing at the threshold of the Yuanying realm. It would show them the essence of a universe's changes, the process, and the changes. Of course, how much a cultivator could comprehend depended on their own fate. There was no fixed rule. Some cultivators had great gains and immediately became nascent souls, while others had nothing and returned resentfully. This was a good thing, a very good thing, for Jindan cultivators to receive such an invitation. Not only did it depend on their strength, but it also depended on their luck. If they were born late or cultivated early, they would miss such an opportunity. Of course, it was impossible to invite unlimited people. Otherwise, in the Zhou Xian upper realm alone, there were more than 100,000 Jindan cultivators. How could they all go up at the same time? In the orbit of Taiposhi, there were dozens of universes, including the Zhou Xian upper realm. Such a large area, there were also many in the cultivation upper realm. Therefore, The selection criteria were very strict. For a Khanate numinous treasure with special abilities like Taiposhi, its criteria were unpredictable and very casual. For example, this time, it chose 5 people in the Zhou Upper Realm. The criteria was to be able to kill those who could surpass realms, which was that face. Now, there was only one person, Thousand Buddha's eyes of the sun and moon, Qingwei's snorting nose, Yuanshir's lips, Xiaoyao's one ear, and Taishuan's all-white clothes. That was why enlightened Master Zhao said that there was no choice in this matter. Only Lu Xiaoyi could go. It could not be faked. If the sect could make the decision, there would be a lot of cultivators fighting over it. Lu Xiaoyi would not even hear the news. At the Taipu realm, is fighting allowed? Is killing allowed? This was Lu Xiaoyi's first reaction. For a swordsman, when outstanding talents were gathered together, his intuition was to fight to the death. Enlightened Master Zhao was speechless. This killing embryo, all he thought about was how to kill people. He was not a cultivator. It was such a pity to give him such an opportunity, but he had to admit that he had indeed asked the main point. Taiposhi, returning to the origin. After hundreds of thousands of years of contact, humans had roughly figured out its temperament. In its consciousness, there was actually no such thing as killing. It was just like them, the products of the universe when it was born. Existence was not necessarily eternal. Destruction was an existence in another sense. There was no difference. The universe it understood was a struggle for the great Tao. In this process, death and injury were inevitable. But Taipu Jun did not think that this was cruel. It was just following the laws of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Killing each other is killing each other. You still have to help it give such a high-sounding reason. Isn't it just a heartless artifact that treats the common people as straw dogs? As long as the temptation is enough in the cultivation world, what's the point of a life-and-death struggle? We don't have to help it with such a hypocritical label, do we? Taoist Master Zhao was speechless. His words were rough, but they were reasonable. In fact, he also thought so. However, in the cultivation world, the true monarchs respected Lord Pu Shi's interests, so they needed to be unified when talking about it. Don't talk nonsense. It's fine if you talk nonsense here, but don't talk nonsense outside, especially in the Plainstone realm. Although Taipu Jun has never made things difficult for the cultivators below, there are some things that are only in the mind. Do you understand? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I understand. Disciple is not stupid. How could I speak ill of Master in Master's home? When we get there, of course we have to pick something good to listen to. Then, what is the specific constitution? Is there a pattern? Taoist Master Zhao shook his head. Taipu Jun's forgetfulness is great, so every 360 years of comprehension is basically a random arrangement. It might be the same as the last time, or it might be completely different. This is impossible to predict. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to get to the bottom of it. Then last time and the time before that, what happened? No matter how forgetful it is, there should at least be a continuity, right? Taoist Master Zhao was even more embarrassed. No cultivator was chosen last time, and no cultivator was chosen last time either. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Just tell me, how many years has it been since the last time a golden core cultivator of the free and unfettered wandering realm participated? Taoist Master Zhao sighed. About 10,000 years ago. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Then there's no need to say, there's definitely no continuity. Chapter 872. Seeing that Taoist Master Zhao was indeed embarrassed, Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to change the topic. Martial uncle, since it's the collective comprehension of the Jin Dan cultivators from the surrounding dozens of universes, and there may even be a battle, then you have to tell me about the relationship between these dozens of universes, right? Which are the allies? Which are the enemies? Which are irrelevant? Is there anything between the few people in the upper realm of Zhou Xian? Is it their own way? Or is it an alliance? Or should we just kill them? Taoist Master Zhao felt that it was better to communicate with such a guy directly. In the Taipu realm, we don't look at background, we don't care about alliances, We only focus on personal cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi understood. Oh, so you're saying that those who block the way can be killed? You don't have to bear any responsibility? Taoist master Zhao reminded him. In principle, this is the case. However, because the arrangements of the Taipu Lord are unpredictable, it may not necessarily be to this extent. If it's not necessary, it's better not to rashly kill them. And I'm warning you, the cultivators in the Taipu realm are elites from the surrounding dozens of universes. They are different from the ordinary people you encounter in the Shaking Shadow realm. For example, the 4 people in the upper realm of Zhou also have records of crossing realms to kill. There's more than one, and there's even Yuanying who killed people who came to their door. Are you sure that you're the strongest? Don't fall into the trap without killing others. Having confidence is a good thing, but blind arrogance is a disaster. The upper realm of Zhou can be called the first realm in the surrounding dozens of universes. It's not an exaggeration to call it the first realm in the entire universe, but this refers to the overall strength. Lu Xiaoyi was beating around the bush and understood some things. It seemed that as the self-proclaimed first realm in the universe, Zhou relied more on their size and quantity to win, and did not stand out in terms of individual cultivation strength. This was also in line with his evaluation of the people of Zhou in the past 100 years of battle. They were indeed not bad, and might have the strength of a 5-ring first-rate cultivator. However, compared to a few top sects, such as the Supreme Xianyuan of the 3 Pure Ones, they were still slightly weaker. Since these Jindan are the elites of the various upper realms of cultivation, they must have their own methods in forming. For those cultivators who already understand the direction of their own Tao realm fusion, it's not necessary to experience the changes in the universe and the formation of the mountains and seas to experience it. So, what's the reason for them to be so eager for it? Taoist Master Zhao nodded. This fellow was reckless, but his mind was still very meticulous. Spiritual opportunity from outer space. In the Taipu realm, when the Lord of Taipu's cultivation cycle fell and the nascent soul restarted, under its influence, the Taipu stone would transform into mountains and rivers. When the heavens and earth were formed, a small amount of Taipu ancient spirits would be randomly produced. That was a spiritual opportunity that was purer and of a higher level than the spiritual opportunity outside the heavens and earth. If a cultivator were to fuse with it before forming the nascent soul, it would have all sorts of unimaginable powers. It could also greatly affect the quality of a nascent soul. That's why I said that you were lucky. At the right time, you displayed the right strength and were chosen by the Lord of Taipu. That's why you had this opportunity. I'll tell you the truth, if it was just based on the sect's recommendation, even if there were 100 spots, it might not be your turn. This is not a blow to you, but the truth. Do you understand? Of course, Lu Xiaoyi understood. Wasn't he a direct descendant? After being in the cultivation world for a long time, he still had this bit of self-awareness. Taoist Master Zhao sighed. But the truth is, it has been 10,000 years since a Jindan disciple has gone to the Taipu realm. You are the first one in 10,000 years, and with your own strength, others can't envy you. Seeing that you have been diligent and sincere all these years and have a close relationship with the sect, I want to remind you not to be arrogant outside and keep a low profile. It's inevitable that people will be jealous, so don't be too arrogant. Lu Xiaoyi was taught a lesson. Don't worry, Martial Uncle, I understand. Taoist Master Zhao instructed. You will wait at Xiaoyao Mountain for guidance. Don't run around anymore. Maybe the other martial uncles will ask you something. Lu Xiaoyi returned to his cave abode in Xiaoyao Mountain. He pondered over the reason for this matter. He was sure that this was a good thing because of a very simple reason. That guy from Qingxian had also squeezed in. Coming from the 3 Pure Ones, that cow's nose was very useful. Wherever there was something good, it couldn't escape their nose. Qingxian's cultivation was far higher than his. When he came to the upper realm of Zhou, he was already close to the peak of Jindan. Lu Xiaoyi suspected that this guy might have a trace of extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity in his storage ring, ready to use it to break through to yuanying at any time. Ever since this guy came as Zhou Xian, he kept a low profile at first because he didn't want to reveal his nascent soul. Later, he might have heard about the magic of the Tai Pu ancient spirit. According to the greedy nature of the three pure ones, of course, he would squeeze in to get share of it. Breaking through to the nascent soul realm was also not difficult for him. Lu Xiaoyi was growing, but this guy didn't stop. He even pretended to announce to the outside world that he had comprehended a yin-yang, celestial dipper supreme art in the past 100 years. Bullshit. Didn't he just want to use the three pure ones things openly? Therefore, the 5 most outstanding Jindan cultivators in the upper realm of Zhou Xian formed a person in a sketch. There were only 4 strokes on the face, eyes, nose, lips, and ears. In addition to the plain clothes, it perfectly outlined the shape of a cultivator. These 3 pure ones bastards snatched everything. There was no Taoist calmness at all. Regarding the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity, this was a hurdle that cultivators couldn't bypass when they formed their nascent souls. Cultivators could only leave the bounded domain after forming their nascent souls. What did they rely on to break away from the gravitational force of the bounded domain's core? It was a trace of extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity. It was the prerequisite for cultivators to truly come into contact with the universe. Therefore, in the formation of the nascent soul, it was always divided into the true nascent soul and the false nascent soul. The true nascent soul was the nascent soul body that had integrated with the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity before forming their nascent soul. Without integrating with the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity, they would never be able to fly out of the bounded domain alone. They wouldn't be able to break free from the shackles of the bounded domain's gravitational force, and would need to be carried by others to fly out. This was very awkward. Moreover, their future path would be limited everywhere, and there was no possibility of them becoming an upper realm perfected sovereign. Therefore, as long as they weren't forced to do so, Jindan cultivators would try their best to obtain a trace of extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity when they were trying to break through to the yuanying realm. It was like a ticket. With it, there would be endless possibilities. In Qingtian, if one wanted to obtain the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity, they had to fight for it on the heaven stairway. However, for a large sect like Xianyuan, it wasn't difficult to do so given the limited power of the cultivators in Qingtian. The extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity on the heaven stairway was enough for the large sects to divide among themselves. Only the small sects would fight for it. The situation in the 5th ring realm was different. There was no heaven stairway. Instead, they had to go to the depths of the Earth's core to gather the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity. In terms of quantity, there was much more than the heaven stairway in Qingtian, so it wasn't too much of a problem. Whether it was the 5th ring realm or Qingtian, cultivators like Lu Xiaoyi, with his strength and background, didn't need to worry about the extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity. This was because he was too far away from forming his nascent soul at that time, so he didn't prepare in advance. In the end, he was suddenly brought to the Zhou Xian upper realm. Chapter 873. In the upper realm of Zhou Xian, the spiritual opportunity was even more abundant. This was one of the reasons why Zhou Xian dared to claim to be the number 1 realm in the universe. It could be said that as long as you reached this level, you would definitely have access to the spiritual opportunity, and there would not be a situation where Jindan lacked the spiritual opportunity and became a fake nascent soul. This kind of unique condition resulted in the prosperity of the upper realm cultivators in Zhou Xian. In terms of numbers, they were far superior to the other upper realms. Hence, Lu Xiaoyi had never considered this factor. In his opinion, if there was a need, he could just go back to Shaoyao Mountain and apply for a strand. However, he did not notice that in the Taipu realm, there was a special existence of Taipu ancient spirit. This was not mentioned in Xiao Yao Travel's ordinary records. He had also skimmed through it, but his nose was not as sharp as Qing Xian's. He could smell even the slightest smell of meat. Of course, Qing Xian would definitely think that the swordsman was greedy by nature and had a premeditated plan, so there was no need to explain. Finally, you are going out to the universe to wreak havoc. One ear, that place is filled with people who can cross realms to kill. Don't think that you are invincible. When you guys come back, your face will be ugly without an ear. Kawa looked at him from the corner of her eyes and could not help but remind him. She had been to the shaking shadow continent many times. She had seen the beautiful scenery and also watched the sword cultivators practice their swordsmanship. To be honest, she was very envious of the impudent environment of the shaking shadow continent, where everyone chased after each other, and the flourishing cultivation environment. However, she was also clear that such a situation could only occur in the initial stages of sex establishment. It cannot be replicated. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. Senior apprentice sister, when I go up, I will see if there is a chance to get a strand for you. I will let you cultivate a white and fat, giant nascent soul. Kawa pursed her lips. I can tell that you are ignorant just by listening to your words. The Taipu ancient spirit chooses its master. Even if you get 10 or 100 strands, they will only recognize you. What's the use of giving it to me? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. There's so many stupid rules. I still want to get more and sell them for spiritual stones. Kawa said seriously. One ear, don't take this lightly. The fight for the grand simplicity ancient spirit had never stopped since this day. I've heard from the perfected lords that every time we go down, the casualty rate is close to 20% to 30%. Don't think that it's a place where you can push me aside. There was once when the Jin Dan from the Zhou upper realm was completely annihilated there, and not a single one returned. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands and said, What insider information do you have? Tell me about it. Senior apprentice sister, your ears are long and you're well informed. I can't even be compared to you. Martial Uncle Zhao is a taciturn person who refuses to say anything. Kawa came here with this intention in mind. There are a few things you need to take note of. First, among the living beings summoned by the Taipu ancient spirit, they're not only human cultivators, but also insect, void beast soul bodies, acquired spirit treasures, and various other strange things. Among these species, most of them are enemies with humans, so don't be fooled by them. Secondly, the cultivation upper realms in these dozens of universes on the surface, they respect our Zhou Xian as the top realm in the universe, but they might not think so in private. Especially the subjugation realm, dragon-slaying realm, star-hunting upper realm, and 7 or 8 other powerful realms. They have always been unconvinced of our Zhou Xian. They joke that Zhou Xian is hiding under the heaven and earth chessboard, not daring to stand out and compete with the other stars outside the universe. Lu Xiaoyi asked, Then let's fight for it. Zhou Xian is so big. Who would it be afraid of? Kawa glared at him. You only know how to fight. These things will be taken care of by the upper realms. It's not something a small Jin Dan should be thinking about. What I want to say is the third point. Even if you're also from the upper realm of Zhou Xian, you need to be more careful. The 9 upper realms of Zhou Xian have a lot of dirty dealings. They're not as harmonious as they seem on the surface. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. I understand. Everyone is an enemy. Kawa laughed. As long as you don't be so arrogant, others might not come to deal with you. But if you want to be like a show-off who carries 2 flags on the heaven and earth chessboard and want to capture all the Taipu ancient spirits in one net, then you'll become the target of everyone. One strand of this thing is enough. It's useless to have more. Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. What's the difference between ordinary extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity and Taipu ancient spirits? Where are the benefits? Why do I feel that all of you think that this is a great opportunity? Kawa shook her head. Among the spiritual immortals and true monarchs that I know, none of them have ever used Taipu ancient spirits, so no one can tell the specific effects. But from what I know, among all the Taipu ancient spirits in the upper realm of Zhou Xian, more than 50% of them have successfully advanced to Yuanying. This is already a very good probability. Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything, What he actually wanted to ask was, if these people were to use ordinary extraterrestrial spiritual opportunity, then would the success rate be low? Just like this time, Zhou Xian and the other four, if they didn't use Taipu ancient spirits, the probability of advancing to Yuanying wouldn't be low. Because they were the best of the best, it wasn't appropriate to compare them like this. In the following time, after Lu Xiaoyi cultivated, he spent most of his time in the library. Now, he had the right to freely choose the martial arts, and there were no restrictions. He had to have a clear understanding of the overall cultivation network of free travel, even if he didn't cultivate it. In terms of swordsmanship, he had completely opened up his own path. It was very difficult for him to find any swordsmanship that he could use. Basically, he needed to integrate his own things to make changes. This was the ability that he had cultivated for 500 years. But in terms of martial arts, he didn't have his own unique thing, and he didn't want to waste time in this aspect. Just the path of swordsmanship alone was enough to give him a headache. In terms of the free travel, he mainly wanted to find something about the celestial martial arts. To put it bluntly, it was the ability to cultivate the Big Dipper star scripture without going to the anti-material space. Since he built his foundation, his cultivation had been alternating between the positive and negative spaces. The main world was the main world, and the anti-space was the supplement. It had been 100 years since he came here from the land of exile, and he hadn't cultivated in the anti-space for 100 years. This would have a certain impact on his cultivation progress. There were two solutions. One was very simple: find an anti-material space that was convenient to enter and exit. In the fifth ring and the blue sky, this wasn't a problem. The blue sky was especially convenient, and his sect elders were also very easy to ask. But in the Zhou upper realm, so far, he didn't have a completely trustworthy cultivator who could arrange for him to go to an anti-material space. Subconsciously, he didn't want to reveal the details of his cultivation of the Big Dipper star scripture in front of others. Moreover, in the free travel, he didn't have any contact with a monarch. As for the Yuanying spiritual master, he lacked confidence in the arrangement. The anti-material space wasn't something that could be opened by just anyone. There were only two realistic ways. One was to find a permanent mission in the anti-material space, but this would take him away from the shaking shadow realm for a long time. The other was to solve this problem in terms of martial arts. Chapter 874. To practice the stellar technique, not everyone needed to travel back and forth between the main and reverse worlds. For low-level cultivators, this was basically an impossible cultivation environment. In Xuanyuan's Yuanying chapter of the Big Dipper star scripture, this problem could be solved, but the method of Yuanying was not something Jindan could do with his current cultivation level. Therefore, he hoped to find an alternative method. The 7 upper sects of Zhou Xian's upper realm were not as strong as the 5 rings' 3 pure ones, but this strength was more in terms of combatability. If one were to compare self-cultivation, immortality, and pure Taoist techniques, the Taoists of Zhou Xian were not weak at all. It was just that their claws and teeth were worn down by the protection of the chessboard of heaven and earth over the long river of time. Therefore, there were too many things that Lu Xiaoyi could learn from in terms of techniques. There was no Taoist sect that did not involve the stellar system. The stellar system was one of the important cornerstones that supported the Taoist system. Looking up at the starry sky was also the goal of every Taoist. In the end, the goal of cultivation was to enter the starry sky. Lu Xiaoyi was looking for such a technique. Although the free wandering sect was the most outstanding in terms of spirit, and the 3 fundamental techniques were all related to spirit, they also had their own stellar system. This was what Lu Xiaoyi was looking for. The immortal who presided over the library had long changed. Lu Xiaoyi's current status was not the same as before. In any case, he was also a gigolo. Rumors of him having some kind of relationship with one of the ancestors above were also faintly spreading. No one was secretly targeting him because of his new identity, so there was a possibility of consulting him. Recently, This disciple has been somewhat obsessed with the stellar technique. However, I see that although the stellar technique in the sect has its own system, it seems to be a little weak. I wonder if Martial Uncle has taught me? The host nodded, then shook his head. This disciple was now famous in the free wandering sect, and could even be said to be famous in Zhou. He already had the qualifications to learn the 3 fundamental techniques of the free wandering sect, but he did not learn them. Instead, he studied the stellar system. He was also a freak. However, unusual people did unusual things. At the level of Jindan, they already had their own opinions and could not be forced. At the very least, to be able to prove that this guy did not come for the core of carefree travel was reassuring. It's like this. Regarding the star system, Zhou and the other 7 Taoist sects have dabbled in it. But to be honest, it's mostly the same. What you see in carefree travel is actually the same as what you see in other places. Among the 7 great sects, the Qingwei Immortal sect was the most proficient and well-versed in the star system. I don't know what aspect of the star system you want to know. If it involves Qingwei's fundamental method, then don't even think about it. If it's something else, there's still a possibility of collecting it, but it'll also depend on luck. Lu Xiaoyi thanked him politely. In the immortal Zhou upper realm, it was the same as the 5 rings. In fact, the various great inheritances and powers did not guard their martial arts very tightly. Other than the fundamental arts, everything else could be found. Of course, the prerequisite was that you had to have the financial resources and connections. The advantage of the upper sects was that one would encounter endless problems in the process of cultivation. Just like the advanced mathematics in the future, everyone had a book, but how many of them became mathematicians? In the process, one would need the experience, insights, experiences, and lessons of the elders and sages. In a sense, these things were more precious than the martial arts itself. If one did not leave it on paper, join a sect, or show outstanding talent, one would not be able to obtain it. For example, Xuanyuan sword skills could be roughly described by anyone. However, if one would really practice it, there would be countless obstacles and layers of obstacles. It was not something that could be solved with just a jade scroll. Throwing out the martial arts was fake, but attracting people to join them was real. This was the usual tactic of every sect. However, he did not know anyone from the Qingwei Immortal sect. Perhaps that Tianguan was one of them. He was just a casual acquaintance, so he could only wait for another opportunity. 2 months later, Lu Xiaoyi was still deep in meditation when he suddenly sensed something. His body swayed, and he walked out of the cave. He felt a voice calling out to him. He knew that the time had come. He didn't resist, but relaxed his body and floated up. He floated higher and further away. The 9 great sects were located in the outermost layer of the nebula in the Zhou upper realm. In other words, their sky was truly connected to the universe. At a height of 10,000 feet, a clear light appeared. It wrapped around his body and pulled him up. When he crossed the chessboard, there was a slight obstruction. Then, he suddenly felt lighter and broke free from the boundary. In the next moment, he appeared in a corridor that looked like a dam. There were 3 big words carved on the corridor. Do not lean on the railings. The entire dam was hundreds of miles long. There was no beginning and no end. On the dam, there were hundreds of cultivators sitting cross-legged. They were not in groups of 2 or 3. Each of them was guarding a section. Obviously, they were the other Jindan cultivators from the cultivation upper realm. Lu Xiaoyi also found an open space. He could feel that there were 4 other cultivators like him. They had just arrived here. 3 of them were very unfamiliar, and 1 of them was very familiar. However, the 2 of them did not speak. They did not communicate with their consciousness. They were all cunning people. They knew that in this situation, it was best to pretend that they did not know each other. They still needed to wait for a while. The Zhou upper realm was not the last place to receive people. The Lord of Taipu still needed to wander in the universe for some time. There were still many places to receive people. In the Taipu realm, there was no sky, no earth, no stars, and no sun. Outside the dam, there was chaos. Lu Xiaoyi could not determine whether they were traveling in the main world or flying in the negative space. His star sensing system became blurry here. This was an obstacle caused by the great difference in realm. The Lord of Taipu had a cycle of 360 years, from Yuanying to Yuanying, and from Yuanying back to Yuanying. In fact, it did not refer to Taiposhi himself, but to the sole power of the Lord of Taipu. In the Taipu realm, there was no doubt about its powerful strength. It would never change. Only the spirit of the innate spiritual treasure would change. In the body of such a top-level spiritual treasure, any Tao state power would be suppressed unless the Lord of Taipu released the restriction. However, there was another possibility. It might not be a restriction, but when the Taipu stone flew at a speed beyond the imagination of the Golden Core cultivators, the Golden Core cultivators' perception of the stars became sluggish because of the speed, and they could not react in time. It was like a mortal sitting on a flying boat counting trees. You would never be able to count them. This was obviously not a place for communication. No one talked, and no one tried to get close. There was no conflict of words, and no conflict of behavior. They were the most outstanding people in their respective realms. They were proud in their hearts, and they were eager to fight. This made Lu Xiaoyi a little disappointed. He originally wanted to take this opportunity to understand the distribution of the universe's boundaries around the Zhou upper realm. Since everyone deliberately kept a distance, he did not need to be friendly with them. It was a little boring. Chapter 875. Time flowed by as Taiposhi flew. New cultivators continuously joined in, and gradually, the dam began to become crowded. For mortals, there was no problem in rubbing shoulders with each other. It was just like watching the waves on a large dam. However, there was a minimum safe distance between cultivators. A dam that was a few hundred li long had to accommodate hundreds of Jindan cultivators, and the distance between each other was only a few li. The key point was that there would always be cultivators who did not strictly follow the average distance between each other. Instead, it would be between 1 or 2 li. This caused the empty space to be crowded if one person was added to it, but it would be empty if no one was added to it. Thus, there would be disputes. Lu Xiaoyi was in such a situation. When he stood on the dam, he strictly followed the distance of 1 li from the Jindan cultivators on his right. However, when the cultivators on his left occupied the space after that, he maintained a distance of half a li. This was an awkward distance. Should someone be added to the middle? When there was still space on the dam, everything was not a problem. However, when the dam slowly filled up and there were more cultivators descending, they could only make use of the gaps and find a slightly wider space to settle down. As more and more cultivators entered, someone finally took a fancy to the space on Lu Xiaoyi's left. No, it was not a person, but a wild boar. Things like pigs were at the bottom of the hierarchy of demonic beasts in the cultivation world. The immemorial divine beasts looked down on them. The void beasts looked down on them. And even the ordinary demonic beasts in the ordinary cultivators' domains felt that they were unbearably filthy. However, they did not know what ability this pig had to be able to be invited up by the Lord of Simplicity. The Lord of Simplicity taught everyone without discrimination. He did not care about such things. However, humans were the most particular about the hierarchy. Therefore, most of the cultivators present, including some demonic beasts with a bit of history, revealed expressions of disgust. The wild boar appeared to be somewhat restrained. This was the first time it had seen so many cultivators. Compared to them, it was at the bottom. It did not like this place. It came from a cultivation world dominated by demonic beasts. This was not common in the various worlds of the universe. Good places could not escape the prying eyes of human cultivators. The reason why this demonic beast world could still exist was completely due to the protection of its extremely special location and environment. However, for an innate spiritual treasure like Taiposhi, there was nothing it could not dig out. The wild boar did not know why it came here. It was chaotic, as if there was a voice telling it that there was something it loved to eat in a certain upper realm. Out of instinct, it followed Qing Guang and came here. In the end, it did not see anything delicious. Instead, it saw a large group of cultivators with ill intentions. This made it immediately realize that it did not matter what it ate. It being eaten by others was the most important thing. Being in the form of a pig was its biggest embarrassment. It was not that it did not want to transform into a human to keep a low profile, but it could not transform at its current level. In other words, it could not transform completely. At most, it could transform into a human face with a pig's body or a pig's face with a human's body. This was the sorrow of ordinary demonic beasts. In this aspect, they were far from those of their own kind with noble bloodlines. In fact, on the dam, there were still some demonic gene-dan creatures. For example, there was a red-crowned crane. It was elegant and noble, and its behavior was calm. No one looked down on it. Some people even greeted it with kindness. This was an auspicious sign. It could be a mount or a battle companion. In addition, there was a black tiger, a big eagle, a snake, a golden turtle. Some were majestic, some were handsome, some were fierce, and some were long-lived. In comparison, its appearance and temperament were very different. It was ashamed of its inferiority. The wild boar was a little regretful. Unfortunately, it could not go back. It could only clench its teeth and endure. As a demonic beast, it also had a kind of instinct. It could instinctively distinguish which cultivators were kind to it, which were malicious, and which were completely unintentional. Unfortunately, most of them were disgusted. There was not a single one who was kind. There were only a few who did not show any emotion. It was very clear why these cultivators would express their wishes so clearly. They were not willing to let a pig like it stand by their side. This made it feel sad, and at the same time, it felt even more inferior. It wanted to find a place with a little space where its neighbors would not be malicious. Unfortunately, it could not find such a place, so it could only settle for the next best thing. It could only find a place that was not malicious and had some empty space beside it. Even so, there were not many places like this. The wild boar took a fancy to a place. On one side, there was a young cultivator who did not emit any kind or evil aura. He was only staring blankly at the chaos outside the dam. On the other side, there was a human cultivator who showed obvious dissatisfaction towards it. However, it could not care less. If it did not hurry up, it would not even have a place like this. In its heart, it was very afraid of humans. Because in the world of demonic beasts, humans were described as demons. They were cold and ruthless. Not only were they strong and powerful, they were also very cruel. They also ate meat. Demonic beasts ate fresh meat, but humans had countless cruel cooking procedures. As long as it thought of its own body being sprinkled with salt, smeared with sauce, and then roasted on a bonfire, it could not help but shudder. It timidly walked to the middle of the two people. It first stretched out its front paw to the young cultivator. Its posture was not very standard. It had just learned it. It was probably fat. In the world of demonic beasts, they did not need this. Then it snorted and said, "Humph, West lewd desolate world's old pig greets fellow Taoist. Humph, this place is too crowded. I hope fellow Taoist does not mind my rudeness." Humph, 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 it burped. It had eaten a bit too much before coming. It knew it was impolite, but it could not help it. Food was the most important thing to a pig. The young cultivator's attitude was gentle. Although he did not reply, he nodded at it. This made the wild boar feel relieved. If it wanted to be relieved completely, it would have to depend on the attitude of the other cultivator. It still sang an unstandard fat song. Because it was the first time it had not been rejected, it spoke more fluently. "Umph, West lewd desolate world's old pig greets fellow Taoist. Umph, this place is too crowded. I hope fellow Taoist does not mind my rudeness." Umph, 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 puff. This time it farted. It cannot be helped. When it was nervous, it liked to fart. The food it ate was also mixed, so the taste was this human cultivator did not hide the disgust in his heart. "Scram, I don't care where you go, just don't stand next to me. How many days have you not bathed? And you're still farting. Do you deliberately not want me to comprehend the realm of heaven and earth transformation? Bath? What was that? Did demonic beasts need a bathe?" For the wild boar, Rolling in the mud and rubbing on the fat under the big trees was what it relied on to live until now. If it did not bathe, it would lose half of its life. Oomph, I'm sorry for the fumes. Oomph, I'm very quiet. I won't disturb fellow Taoist. If you fart again, I'll just hold it. Oomph, I have nowhere else to go. That cultivator did not let it go. Are you leaving or not? If not, when the Taipu spiritual opportunity appears, I'll kill you first and feed you to the dogs. Before he finished speaking, there was another puff. But this time, it was not the wild boar. The wild boar shook its front hooves. It wanted to say that it was not the one who farted, but it was afraid of implicating the person who farted. For a moment, the big pig's face turned red. But then it heard a voice say, I'm the one who farted. What are you going to do about it? Even immortals can't stop people from breathing. You're quite arrogant? Do you keep your word in Taipu? Are you dreaming? Chapter 876. The one who spoke was the young man on the other side of the wild boar. Seeing that the two human cultivators were about to quarrel over it, the wild boar did not want to cause trouble, but trouble came knocking on its door. Ha, it's all Old Pig's fault, causing the two of you to be estranged. Ha, Old Pig will leave now, the young man snorted. Go somewhere else and experience this kind of humiliation again. Old Pig stopped in his tracks. That's right. If he changed places, wouldn't he have to go through it again? Then he might as well grit his teeth and bear with it here. That cultivator narrowed his eyes, but did not even look at the wild boar, only staring at that young man. Dragon Slayer Lu Zishu, may I ask your name? It's good that we can get closer to each other. The young man sneered. Zhou Xian is single-eared. It's best not to get close. Otherwise, I'm afraid that someone will not be able to get out of the Taipu realm. Lu Zishu's gaze was like a knife. No wonder. I was wondering which realm had such a compassionate heart. So it's the Zhou Xian people hiding behind the chessboard, the first realm in the universe. How impressive, how eloquent. But there's no chessboard here. I wonder where your courage comes from. Lu Xiaoyi did not bother with him anymore. There was no point in saying more. When it was time to fight for the Taipu ancient spirit, who stood and who fell, that was the truth. He never discriminated against the demonic beasts, but he also never liked them. So, ever since he started cultivating, he had never tamed a demonic beast, even if it was a pet. This wild boar was dirty and smelly. If it was another occasion, he would also despise it. But he did not understand. Why did he get angry so quickly when others despised this wild boar? This should not be the behavior of a mature Jindan cultivator. He was too impulsive and not calm enough. Whether it was his personal preference or his rational choice, he should not offend a powerful human for a dirty pig. But he still did it. Thinking about it now, he felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. So be it, it's not a big deal. If that dragon-slaying cultivator did not purposely find trouble with him, he would also not take the initiative to find trouble with him. He had heard too much of the quarrels and harsh words between cultivators, so he did not take it to heart. Furthermore, what the other party said was also reasonable. However, if that dragon-slaying cultivator really came to find trouble with him during the Taipu Ancient Spirit segment, he would not mind sending him to the Western Paradise. This was his principle of doing things. It was just a dispute that could not be any more normal in the world of cultivators. He did not care about the boar who looked down on him or the dragon slayer who cast gloomy glances at him from time to time. What he paid attention to were other things. As more and more cultivators descended, he finally understood some of the basic rules that Lord Tai Planus used to pull people in. First of all, there was no discrimination in education. Regardless of race, it was the same for connate numinous treasures. They were all non-numinous treasures. There was no such thing as high or low, nor was there any consideration of the substantial hegemony of human beings in the cultivation world of the universe. Secondly, Zhou Xian, the so-called number one realm in the universe, did not receive any preferential treatment in terms of numbers. Including him, there were a total of 5 people in Zhou Xian. Every time Taiposhi stopped to receive cultivators from different realms, there would always be 5 people. This meant that Lord Tai plainness did not care about the size of each realm or how strong they were. Instead, it was truly an equal distribution of 5 people in each realm. Even the desolate world of Silu, where the wild boar was, had 5 demonic beasts, just that they were not 5 pigs. It was very fair. The reception was nearing its end. The number of Jean Dan, which was more than 300 people, meant that Lord Tai plainness had traveled to more than 70 cultivation upper realms. This kind of mobility was indeed shocking. However, once one thought about its roots, it was not worth making a fuss about. When a number of Jean Dan reached 360, Lord Tai plainness stopped the reception and the spiritual assembly began. In the depths of Tai Po Shi, a consciousness was silently observing those living beings. It was neither worried nor happy. How many years had it been? It was almost impossible to remember clearly. In the cultivation realm, everyone said that pre-celestial spiritual treasures had the least desires. This was because their lifespan was as long as the heavens. This was not true. As long as it was a living being, as long as it had consciousness, it would definitely have desires. Its desire was to break through the vicious cycle of this realm and take another step forward in its realm. It had a reason why it had to achieve this goal. In the long changes of its life, it gradually found a way to break the vicious cycle. That was to preach and place its hopes on the future. With its own strength, it would never be able to break through this vicious cycle. It could only help other living beings and let them understand the changes of the universe, the changes of the heavens and the earth, and the rules of the heavens. Then, it gave its most precious Taiposhi ancient spirit, hoping that one day, one of the living beings it helped would be able to ascend to the celestial realm. As long as one of them succeeded, it would be the day it broke through the vicious cycle and was reborn. Therefore, in the cultivation realm, there was no such thing as an opportunity for no reason. There was no such thing as an unrequited sacrifice. If you could not see it, it was only because your realm was not high enough. Becoming a celestial was an illusory goal for cultivators. The frequency of new people appearing in the celestial realm could be counted in tens of thousands of years. There were countless universes. Therefore, its current actions were no different from looking for a needle in a haystack. It had been fishing for hundreds of thousands of years and would continue to do so because it had an endless lifespan. If it wanted to support the right person, it needed a reliable target location. Which universe, which realm was most likely to produce a celestial? It originally had a target location. That star realm had produced a celestial in tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, pre-celestial spiritual treasures also had their own territories. How could it allow outsiders to step into its territory? In that star realm, there was already a powerful pre-celestial spiritual treasure guarding it. Its realm was even higher than it, so it could not interfere. Therefore, it could only guard these dozens of universes and spread its net all over the sky, hoping to catch a big fish, to relieve itself of the pain of the cycle of several eras. If it wanted cultivators to be able to help it, it could only start from Jean Dan. Borrowing the opportunity of cultivators forming their nascent souls, it could use the connection established by the ancient spirits of Taipu to complete its self-redemption. Another 360 years had passed, and it was another cycle. It had long since learned to not have any hope of becoming an immortal among this batch of people. This was what time had taught it. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment in the future. When everyone arrived, it casually found an anchorage in the universe and prepared to start. It had been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years and experienced countless changes in the world. This was not something it deliberately did, but a natural and uncontrollable action of its body under the constraints of the heavenly Tao. It was this endless cycle of demonstration that caused it to be in an endless cycle. What it wanted to do was to bring these living beings over, and then let its body evolve those Eternals under the control of the heavenly Tao. It also hoped that there would be cultivators who would be able to discover something in this eternity and be able to continue walking. Chapter 877. There was no admonishment, no forward, and no encouragement. Even the person could not be seen or heard. After hundreds of thousands of years of repetition, an ancient soul would no longer be able to maintain its initial enthusiasm for anything meaningful. It was already not easy for it to persevere until now. No one paid attention to the master's strangeness, because every cultivator could feel that there was a slight change in the chaotic space outside the dam. There was a mysterious force brewing and accumulating all the cultivators standing on the dam, no matter if they were human cultivators, beast cultivators, or other messy orthodoxies. When the chaotic changes of the universe finally began to appear, they threw everything to the back of their minds and focused on the changes in front of them. This was the only time in their lives that they would not be able to see it all over again if they did not pay attention. A trace of purple gas appeared in the chaotic space, stirring up inexplicably. To be honest, such a big scene was too advanced for cultivators at the level of Gene Dan. It was very difficult to understand. It should be understood after the cultivators entered the Yuanying realm. However, the Master of Simplicity had no choice. If he found some Yuanying to comprehend it, they might be able to comprehend more and deeper. However, the problem was that after they had comprehended it, it would have nothing to do with the Master of Simplicity. Even if it was a primordial spiritual treasure, it might be possible for it to show mercy once in a while, but to expect it to contribute for hundreds of thousands of years was also a fantasy. It could only depend on one's own ability to comprehend it. Chaos referred to the state of qi, form, and substance before the formation of the universe. It was a stage in the ancient time concept, after the fourth Tai, Su of the five Tai Tian Tai Tian Tai Tian. In the past, the sages unified yin and yang. Those with form were born in formlessness, and the world was peaceful. It was said that there was Tai Yi, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, and Tai Su. Tai Yi did not see qi. Tai Chu, the beginning of qi. Tai Shi, the beginning of qi. Tai Su, the beginning of substance. Qi, form, and substance were present, but not separated. Hence, it was said to be chaotic. Chaotic, it was said that all things were chaotic, but not separated. Not seen, not heard, and not followed. Hence, it was said to be yi. Changeable is formless. Changeable is 1. Changeable is 7. Changeable is 9. 9 changes, in the end, were repeated changes into 1. Firstly, it was the beginning of the transformation. Clear and light is heaven above, turbid and heavy is earth below, and qi is man. Therefore, heaven and earth contain essence, and all living things are born. In theory, Lu Xiaoyi understood it, but if he wanted to combine it with the changes in reality, it was a completely different matter. He immediately noticed that he was utterly unable to grasp the slightest change amidst the myriad of threads at the beginning of the chaos. Because this process contained 36 connate grandaos and countless post-celestial grandaos. Every single cultivator from every single sect would be able to find what they needed from this. And tracking the changes in every single grandao was something that probably even a god wouldn't be able to accomplish. He could only focus on the aspect that he was most familiar with, and not end up with nothing after studying everything. He had a few directions: the Lesser Xiantian Dao, the Star Dao, and the Slaughter Dao. These 2 directions were not obvious when the chaos was first formed, but they would appear more often at the end of the universe's transformation. In order to make the best use of this opportunity, there was only one innate Dao that was most suitable, the Dao of 5 elements. A great Tao that ran through the changes of the universe. It was also the great Tao that he had invested the most time and energy into. He had no other choice. He could only deepen his understanding of the 5 elements here, from the perspective of a mountain, a stone, and a river to the perspective of the entire universe. This was a huge leap, and there were many things that he was still unable to comprehend for the time being. He could only comprehend as much as he could. But in his heart, he was quite dissatisfied with this kind of comprehension environment. It was equivalent to letting a primary school student who had just learned how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide into a university's mathematics church. He didn't memorize, and it was useless to memorize. He could only comprehend and follow what he could understand. Even if the path of the 5 elements was getting narrower, at least he could still understand. What's the use of looking at things that you don't understand? The cultivation world was a competition of understanding and not how much memory one had. Among the 360 cultivators, most of the human cultivators were the same as Lu Xiaoyi, grasping the key points, grasping the core, grasping their own strengths, and focusing on a single direction. This was the core philosophy of hundreds of years of cultivation. Just like how Lu Xiaoyi looked at the 5 elements, Qing Xian must be looking at yin and yang. Taiposhi's chaotic changes of a universe waited for no one. He wouldn't give you the time to ask your teacher if you didn't understand, or to flip through the ancient books. Of course, there were also a few who were like a bear breaking a stick. Those were the cultivators with weak willpower, lack of decisiveness, and dabbling in a wide range of things. When the treasure was suddenly opened, they simply couldn't control the greed in their hearts. The demon cultivators were relatively simple. They definitely paid attention to things related to their natal supernatural powers. This was not knowledge, but instinct. There were also those who were dancing with joy, scratching their ears and cheeks in joy. But in fact, they were just watching the fun. If you asked them what they had comprehended from it, they would also be confused. For example, the wild boar. This was also a kind of joy. It was also a kind of harvest. The harvest might be a flash of inspiration in the future due to fate. At this time, no one cared about it anymore. When the cultivator was immersed in his own Tao state world, all the noise around him didn't exist. This kind of comprehension was more of a summary and provided a direction. It required the cultivator to go back and spend a lot of time to deepen, strengthen, and expand it. The universe had changed for at least hundreds of millions of years and had gone through many eras. If such a long time of changes were to be condensed into a period of time allowed by a human's lifespan, it could be imagined how hurried and urgent it would be, not to mention that in Taiposhi's short 1 year, the details were blurred. Expecting to comprehend Tao overnight in such an environment was disrespectful to Tao. Half a year had passed, and the outside of the dam was no longer chaotic. It had entered the post-universe development period, and the changes of the 5 elements were no longer so violent. They had become gentle and calm. Lu Xiaoyi finally had a chance to observe the state of the cultivators around him. This was not because he was absent-minded, but because he didn't take Taiposhi's comprehension as an opportunity for a carp to leap over the dragon's gate. Whoever thought so was a fool. It had to be said that as the top Gene Dan in the dozens of nearby universes, most of them had strong hearts and steel-like wills. Some continued to study, some closed their eyes and reflected, some turned away, some communicated in 2s and 3s, some lay down to sleep, some strolled along the dam, and some gorged themselves. The gorging was right next to him. The wild boar opened its big mouth and had a huge stomach. It was holding the last piece of bone and slowly licking it. It had been too long, and it didn't carry enough food. It also didn't plan well, so it was normal for it to miss the next meal. Now it was licking the bone in its mouth while looking around with its small eyes. Unfortunately, how could this place be a place to hunt for food? Just when it was bored to death and didn't even have something to grind its teeth with, a storage ring was thrown in front of it. Suddenly, a pile of food poured out from it. It was smoked, pickled, roasted, air-dried, and smoked. The wild boar lay on the ground with its belly on the ground. It gave the young Taoist a firm salute and then opened its mouth to chew. Chapter 878. A year later, the changes in the universe outside the dam began to stabilize. This indicated that the first phase of Taiposhi was about to end. After the appetizer, it was time for the main course. To the Gene Dan cultivators, the first phase of the chaos change was uncertain. Was it not important? No, it was extremely important. The problem was that they could not enjoy it fully yet. It was like ants chewing on an elephant. Were they full? They were full, but the problem was that they were far from the essence. The Tai-Pu ancient spirit was the most practical. It had a decisive effect on every cultivator's path to the upper realm. Furthermore, the process was controllable. At the very least, they could use their own strength to fight for it and not passively endure it. This time, there was finally a voice. It was an emotionless voice, as though it was talking about something unrelated to it. The Tai-Pu ancient spirit comes from the chaos. There are 36, and it depends on one's fate. The path of cultivation is survival of the fittest. Enter my Tai-Pu, and your life and death will be decided by the heavens. The meaning of the Tai-Pu Lord was clear. This time, the chaos change in the universe produced a total of 36 Tai-Pu ancient spirits, corresponding to 360 Gene Dan cultivators. On average, 10 people would fight for one strand. This probability was extremely low, but in the eyes of the Gene Dan stage cultivators, the change in the primal chaos was a free win. There was another 10% chance of the Tai-Pu ancient spirit, so it was still worth participating. Taking risks was the normal state of a cultivator's cultivation. With their respective positions in the domain, who would think that they were weaker than others? Once the dam's restrictions were lifted, Lu Xiaoyi felt his perception of the stars returning to his body. This was probably because the Tai-Pu Lord had removed the restrictions on the cultivators. What was left was to consider how to use his own ability to obtain the Tai-Pu ancient spirit in this small universe formed by the chaos. The Gene Dan cultivators were either hurried or slow. They all disappeared into the small universe. From the dam, the small universe in Taiposhi did not seem big. But when they flew in, they knew what a universe was. Trying to find 10 strands of Tai-Pu ancient spirit in such an environment was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Lu Xiaoyi was the kind of person who was neither in a hurry nor in a hurry. He always insisted that there was nothing on the path of cultivation that could decide a cultivator's fate for the rest of his life, especially for someone like him who had invested far more in the Sword Dao than in the cultivation of cultivation methods. How much weaker would an ordinary extraterrestrial spiritium be than a great simplicity ancient spirit? Then, before the appearance of the great simplicity ancient spirit, how did cultivators ascend the immortal gate? Moreover, looking at the history of Zhou, there was no mention of a certain person becoming an immortal because he obtained the Tai-Pu ancient spirit. Thus, if he obtained it, it was his fortune. If he did not, it was his fate. That was all. The wild boar was still dawdling behind him. Lu Xiaoyi could ignore the cultivator's threat, but it couldn't. Therefore, when it saw Lu Xiaoyi slowly flying away, it didn't dare to follow. It wasn't sure if this young cultivator would help it in a life and death situation. Helping it to quarrel and giving it food didn't mean that he would help it fight with his life. These were two different concepts. The wild boar was very clear about this. Until it saw the cultivator who hated it fly away, the wild boar decisively chose the opposite direction and ran as fast as lightning. Its goal wasn't to find the so-called great simplicity ancient spirit. What was there to eat? It was just a puff of smoke, a puff of air. There was nothing to chew on and no taste. Its goal was to preserve its little life and survive this second trial. Then it would return to the deserted world of Silu in one piece and continue its carefree life. As a type of demon beast, the wild boar's abilities were very limited. It didn't have any remarkable abilities. Did having a big stomach count? It estimated that when it was far away from the malicious cultivator, it slowly stopped running and walked leisurely. It thought that since this small universe had boundaries, mountains, and rivers, would there also be living creatures? It was hungry and needed to fill its stomach. It would be best if it could hunt some wild game. It wasn't picky about what to eat. It would even eat grass when it was hungry, but it wasn't at that stage yet. It wasn't picky about wild game, except for two kinds of meat. One was pork, which was its own kind. Although it was very rude, it couldn't eat its own kind. The other was rabbit, which was a little strange. It couldn't figure out why it didn't eat rabbit. It wasn't because of the meat, but an inexplicable influence. It just didn't want to hurt such cute little animals. It slowed down and wandered around the various terrains in the small universe. There were floating mountains, floating rivers, vast plains, and dense forests, but there were no living creatures living in them. Because life needed time to nurture. It was okay to evolve mountains, rivers, and celestial bodies, but it was immoral to evolve life. Even the heavenly axiom wouldn't deliberately accelerate the growth of life under such circumstances. So, there was nothing to eat. The wild boar was a little depressed, but it wasn't a pig that gave up easily. There were no living creatures, but there were still mountain products and fruits that could fill its stomach. It had to find more. The small universe wasn't small. 360 cultivators were thrown in, but it didn't seem crowded at all. It was rare to bump into other people in the process of flying, which made the wild boar feel a little relieved. It began to fly according to its instinct to find food. If it had to say what kind of magical ability it had, then it had a natural instinct for things that could enter its mouth. Just like now, after flying for a few days, it felt a lot of things on its left side, so it flew according to its instinct. When it flew into a stone forest, it was a little confused. Yes, this was the place. But what could be in a stone forest? Delicious wild mushrooms appeared in the wild boar's mind. That's right, this must be it. Although wild mushrooms were more fragrant when stewed with meat, when there was no other way, the taste of raw mushrooms was also not bad. It began to regret eating all the food in the young man's storage ring. Wouldn't it be better to leave some for stewing? The stone forest wasn't too big, and it was bare. After circling around, the wild boar didn't find anything. Not to mention wild mushrooms, there wasn't even moss. This made him doubt his instinct. In this place, he couldn't even find food. He was a little unwilling. When he carefully searched for the second time, he found something unusual. In a deep crevice, there seemed to be something unusual. His obsession with food made him never give up. So he crouched beside the crevice and stuck his head in. One of his long noses was shaking desperately, trying to figure out what treasure was hidden in there. Disturbed by him, that strange thing was actually a living creature. With a flash of light, it fled outside. The wild boar wanted to chase after it, but suddenly felt the power of a spell fluctuating behind him. With the ability that he had trained in the wild for thousands of years, he somersaulted on the ground and dodged the spell. When he looked up again, he saw a figure chasing after the light and leaving behind a sentence. Only the virtuous can obtain natural spiritual objects. You, a wild boar demon, want to waste natural resources? This time I'll teach you a lesson. Next time, I won't show you any mercy. Chapter 879. The wild boar understood that it was not food, it was the gift from the Lord of Simplicity, the ancient Simplicity Spirit. It found the ancient Simplicity Spirit, and the unknown cultivator found it. Seeing its strange behavior, to be honest, the wild boar did not care much about this thing. There were so many senior monsters in the deserted world of Silu. Without this thing, they could still become Yuaniing, but it had never heard of anyone who used the ancient Simplicity Spirit to become more powerful. It could also be that it was ignorant, but the wild boar always thought that the ancient Simplicity Spirit might be more useful to humans. It could not accept this kind of method. If that human cultivator had asked for it, it would have generously given the opportunity to him. Who knew? It might even have been able to make a human friend. It wouldn't have been treated like a fool and a moron who stole its opportunity and even threatened it. Were all humans so domineering? The mountain boar was very sad. Its strength was not enough. Moreover, in its hometown, disputes were all fair and above board. It was unlike here, where the existence of human cultivators caused everything to be filled with variables. It was trapped in this situation and could not see clearly. The sadness passed quickly, but the hunger remained. Soon, the wild boar began to look for food happily. Its luck was not bad. A few days later, it found the smell of food in a pool of water. Would there be fish? The wild boar was not sure. It dived into the water, and there was not a single fish hair, but there was a glimmer hidden in the ripples of the water. Was it another wisp of ancient Simplicity Spirit? The wild boar did not know whether its luck was good or bad, But since it had nothing to do, why not catch it first? Its underwater skills were limited. It could avoid water, but its movements were too big. While it was chasing the ancient simplicity spirit underwater, it was as if there was a monster running amok in the water. Such movements could not be hidden from the cultivators in the sky, and there were two of them. Just like last time, no one negotiated with it, and they directly used spells to talk. The result was no different. The wild boar fled, leaving behind two cultivators to fight over it. The wild boar felt very wronged. It was injured this time, but this kind of pain was nothing to a wild boar. The real pain was in its heart. No one accepted it. No one wanted to be his friend, because it didn't bathe, was ugly, and liked to fart. But it had its own pride, especially when they were full. At the same time, it realized that there was no food in this place. It could still feel it, because what it felt was too simple and ancient. It could no longer rely on its intuition to find food, because it might find trouble. The wild boar started to wander around in boredom. It even started to consider if it should just find a place to sleep, and sleep until the 36 strands of Taisu ancient souls were taken. In a muddle, the wild boar started to change its strategy. It wanted to find a comfortable place where it could not be easily disturbed to sleep. In its 1,000 years of cultivation, whenever it was hungry and had no food, it would sleep to forget its hunger and satisfy its appetite in its dreams. But before it could find a shelter from the wind and rain, another figure appeared in the sky, and it felt goosebumps all over its body. It chose a direction and ran away. Following closely behind was the figure of a cultivator in hot pursuit. The wild boar was not stupid, especially when it was a matter of life and death. There were no coincidences in the cultivation world. To meet its only enemy in such a vast universe, there could only be one answer. The other party was deliberately looking for it. Just for a few words, was it worth it? And it was not the one who said the real harsh words. When the wild boar ran for its life, its speed was actually not slow. As a type of demon beast, even the lowest level pig had the instincts of a beast. Moreover, it was a Gene Dam level pig. But at the same time, it could not shake off the pursuer behind it, nor could it avoid the spells that were constantly attacking it. Its skin was rough, its flesh was thick, its blood was abundant, it had strong resistance, and it did not bathe. Basically, it was the wild boar's trump card. Even if it was continuously attacked by a top Gene Dan cultivator, it would not be weakened in the slightest. Just like how it was impossible for a mortal to control an injured wild boar, it was also difficult for a cultivator to control a demon boar of the same level. When it exploded with brute force and used its life to open a passage, no control spells could restrain it. Along the way, they met other cultivators, but no one interfered with the humans chasing after the wild boar. Not to mention the humans, even a red-crowned crane turned a blind eye to this. It probably never acknowledged that this fellow was also a demon beast. The wild boar knew that it could not maintain this state for too long. The reason why it did not turn back and fight to the death was because it still had a glimmer of hope. It hoped that it could meet the human youth who spoke for it again. This was the reason why it chose to run in this direction. If it did not meet him, it would turn back and struggle. It knew that the hope was very small. It was also because he wanted to exhaust the wild boar's potential as much as possible that the cultivator was careless in his pursuit. He was enjoying the process. A beast that dared to ignore his words. What right did it have to gather with the humans to fight for the opportunity? Behind his carelessness was a hidden ruthlessness and cruelty. The wild boar ran in despair. It ran in despair. The direction it chose was the direction that the young cultivator was flying in. It was close to the dam, but it did not meet him. This could only mean that he had already changed his direction, or he had already sped up and left. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to still dawdle in front of the dam after a few days. Lu Xiaoyi was indeed dawdling. His philosophy had always been to not pursue things with a small probability. A 10% probability was no longer a matter of fighting power, but a matter of whether he could touch it or not. Instead of tirelessly searching everywhere like a dog, it was better to do something certain. For example, being in the small universe, he could more directly experience the changes of the five elements here. Although the evolution of heaven and earth had ended, it meant that the changes were no longer intense. Compared to the normal world, the changes of the five elements here could still be said to be endless. He could do this because he had a deeper understanding of the five elements than others. This was the benefit of certainty. He could touch it and see it. If he had a little bit of luck in the process, it would be best if he met a wisp of ancient spirit. If he did not meet it, at least he would gain more than 90% of the cultivators. This was his philosophy. There was a violent spiritual opportunity in front of him. His spirit was good, and he instantly understood what was happening. He sighed. The persistence and self-esteem of the cultivators were annoying. Did they not know what it meant to take a step back and be at peace? He was not stupid enough to hurt a human cultivator in order to protect an animal. All of this was for himself. Because such a person could not let go of a mere wild boar, it was even more impossible for him to let him go. There was a reason for him to draw his sword. A burst of sword light rose up and whizzed out. Chapter 880. The wild boar's divine sense was far inferior to Lu Xiaoi's. Hence, before it could sense the person, it had already seen the overwhelming sword light. This made it widen its eyes in despair. It was somewhat regretful. If it had known this would happen, it would have fought to the death with that cultivator. Even if it was destined to die, at least it would have fought to its heart's content. Its skin was thick and tough against the spells of the Dharma meridians. It was not at an advantage against the body cultivators. What was most afraid of was this kind of flying sword with extremely strong penetrative power. Its thick skin was completely useless against such flying swords. When it was full of vitality, it might be able to withstand a few swords, but its current situation, the flying swords almost brushed past its body. Due to inertia, the wild boar's speed did not decrease at all. Then it saw the only young cultivator in the Taipu realm that it felt close to. It could not speak for the time being, because the flying swords came one after another, endless and endless. Even though it knew that these flying swords could not pierce it, the wild boar tried to fly as straight as possible. It was afraid that one of the flying swords would miss its aim and pierce a hole in its body. When it finally stopped running, the sky had become quiet. Not only could it not see the flying swords, even the cultivator who was chasing it could not be seen. Where is he? Where did he go? The wild boar was still somewhat confused. Lu Xiaoi played it down. I persuaded him to leave. Why? Do you have anything to say to him? The wild boar finally saw a piece of the Taoist robe in the sky, falling slowly in the breeze. It could not help but feel a chill in its heart. It was safe, but it had also come to the side of a big insect. It just did not know the appetite of this big insect. No, nothing to say. Thank you for your help. You are my second parent. If you have any orders, I, old boar, will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. Lu Xiaoi waved his hand. Second parent? Are you scolding me in a roundabout way? I'm helping myself, not you. Don't take it to heart. What he said was the truth. Such a vengeful person, he definitely couldn't let him go. Maybe he could persuade him and smooth things over. But don't forget, there were 5 cultivators from each realm in this Taipu realm who knew if he would gather others to join forces and provoke him. He was afraid of trouble, so he was used to solving the problem first. He continued to fly forward. He did not need a dirty pig to be deeply grateful to him. He had already done 2 very inexplicable things in this trip to the Taipu realm, and both of them were related to this pig. It was just like how deep the relationship between this wild boar and him was. It was something that needed to be carefully considered. While he was minding his own business, the wild boar was pondering behind him. Don't be fooled by its ugly appearance and stupid appearance, but when it really puts heart into it, it had some tricks up its sleeves. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to live until now and become a Jean Dan. It knew very well how difficult it was to find a person, or rather, a a pig, in such a large space like the universe. It was purely a matter of luck. Yet, that damned bastard was able to find it. He must have asked around before he was able to pinpoint its exact location. In other words, there were other people, and there was more than one difficulty, who knew that dead man was looking for trouble with a pig. Then now that dead man was dead, and the pig was still alive, what would happen? At the very least, this dead man's realm would definitely not forgive it. Perhaps even other human cultivators who loathed it. It found that although it had temporarily escaped from its predicament, there was an even bigger predicament waiting for it. How to solve it? Right now, it seemed that there was only one way. Lu Xiaoyi felt the wild boar's sneaky actions behind him and couldn't help but frown. What? Why don't you go and try your luck? Why are you following me? The wild boar gathered its courage. Humph, this old boar has a skill. I can find spiritual opportunity. Humph, since Tao Friend has helped me out of my predicament, this old boar is not someone who does not repay kindness. Humph, I am willing to lead the way for Tao Friend to find the great simplicity ancient spirit. Lu Xiaoyi gave a smile that was not a smile. You are afraid that others will find trouble with you, so you follow behind me to seek protection, right? If you have something to say, then say it honestly. Where did you learn to be so secretive, not telling the truth at all? The wild boar's face turned red and explained, Tao Friend is wise, Humph. This old boar does indeed have the intention to seek protection, but it is also true that I can find spiritual opportunity. Humph. In these few days, this old boar found 2 strands of great simplicity ancient spirit, but in the end, they were both snatched away by others. Humph, humph. If there is even half a word of falsehood, this old boar will be struck by lightning. Lu Xiaoyi did not think that it would dare to lie to him. This old boar was not that stupid. But he was really curious, what ability did the wild boar have to dare to boast that it could find great simplicity ancient spirit? It was worth a try. All right, you can follow me, but I cannot guarantee your absolute safety. You should know about the matters of cultivation. The wild boar opened its mouth. I know, Humph, I know. If we really meet a battle, this old boar will help if I can. If I can't, I will run. I will definitely not cause trouble for Tao Friend. Humph, running away is my specialty. A human and a boar. This was a strange combination. Lu Xiaoyi was still unhurriedly carrying out his research on the 5 elements. The wild boar, who had completely let go of its worries completely, for the first time, it rejected Lu Xiaoyi's food. Let's go out and eat. Humph. This old boar's ability to find food. Oh no, the ability to find spiritual opportunity. The hungrier it is, the more effective it is. Once I am full, I will not feel anything. Humph, humph. The Lord of Simplicity watched every movement within the great simplicity realm. In the past, it would not do this. Once the small universe was opened up, it would allow the practitioners to play around. It would definitely not interfere, but this time, the situation was different, because it found 2 very interesting little fellows as an innate spiritual treasure. Even if it was only in the realm of Yuanying, it could not lose some of its innate special abilities. For example, it had a special ability to identify qi. This was the special ability of an ancient product of chaos. It did not sound very useful, but in some aspects, it could be done. Even a real deity might not be able to do it. Any product of the universe, whether it was a star, a meteorite, or a celestial body, it could accurately determine their growth rings and their origin with just a glance of its aura. As for people, as long as it scanned them, its origin would be clear. There was no way it would make a mistake. Just like now, among the 360 Gene Dam practitioners, it found 2 fellows who did not belong to the dozens of universes. If it was a nascent soul stage cultivator or a perfected cultivator, such a situation would be very normal since they could already travel in the void. However, if it was a golden core stage cultivator who could not leave the domain and had no roots in these dozens of universes, such a situation would be very thought-provoking. Of course, it would not expose it. It had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. It knew the truth of the cultivation world that could not be exposed. It did not have this obligation. It was even more unwilling to bear the karma that came from it. So even if it was two strange little Jean Dan who crossed over through some unknown method, it was only a small matter. It was not worth making a fuss about. But the problem was, it knew the origin of these two little fellows. Chapter 881. Recognizing auras was Tai Pu Jun's instinct. It could see through the celestial bodies in the universe at a glance. It was the same for people, but it had some limitations. For example, it needed to be familiar with the aura of a certain universe or a certain region to be able to determine the origin of people and living beings. It hadn't traveled through all the universes, so there would always be auras that it didn't know, or most of them. However, it was familiar with the auras of these two little guys, because it had once hoped to wander in that region of space, because that region of space was the place where it thought it was most likely for another immortal to appear. The reason why it didn't stay was because there was an even more ferocious, innate spiritual treasure in that place. It was a big tree whose realm was above it. Therefore, it couldn't stay. One universe couldn't accommodate the existence of two innate spiritual treasures. There had to be a first-come, first-served rule. It was the latecomer. It was precisely because it had been to that place that it was very familiar with the aura of that place. It was completely sure that these two little guys must have come from that place. This made it very interested, because it had always thought that the cultivators from that place had the possibility of becoming immortals. This possibility was far greater than the possibility of these dozens of universes. Becoming immortals was a very elusive thing. For an innate spiritual treasure like it relied on its feelings. Then, could one of these two little fellows be his future benefactor? The probability was infinitely small, but no matter how low it was still greater than the other 300 cultivators. It had already wandered in the dozens of universes nearby for hundreds of thousands of years. The highest cultivation level that it had helped were only 2 half-immortals, and they had long been buried. For an existence like it, what it valued the most was change. If everything remained the same, it could be sure that the 300 people this time still wouldn't have the future hoped for. However, if there was a change, then there were countless possibilities, especially if they came from that place. It liked change. Change meant that it might be a good beginning. Therefore, it began to pay attention to these two little guys. Of the two people, one of them was of the orthodox Taoist lineage of humanity, originating from the most ancient three clear Taoism. He had a sense of propriety in his actions and knew when to advance and retreat. He had a deep understanding of yin and yang. At first glance, one could tell that he was a rare seed of cultivation. The other came from a vicious sword vein. It was the famous Xianyuan sect in the universe. 10,000 years ago, it was this Xianyuan sect that produced a great figure. Even the immortal realm was shaken by his sword. That was the golden immortal realm of the great all-embracing heaven. Unfortunately, the appearance of these two people caused ripples to appear in its heart that had not fluctuated for a long time, but it could not tell which one was more hopeful. 3 pure ones? The 3 pure ones had quite a few people up there, so how could they be any more arrogant? Xianyuan? The last one had almost overturned the celestial world. How could there be another one? No matter what, it felt that it should give the appropriate amount of attention. Who could say for sure what would happen in the future? However, it would not interfere rashly because it knew the implications of the cultivation world. If it did not interfere, there was hope for its own problem to be solved. If it directly interfered, it would be easy to get involved. The wild boar was depressed, very depressed. When it first came in, it easily found the 2 Taisu ancient spirits. However, after following the swordsman for a few days, it did not find anything. This made it very anxious, as it was eager to prove itself. It needed to prove that it was not only able to eat, but also had other uses. Human cultivators never had much patience for useless companions. The swordsman's voice sounded in its ear. "Don't run around there. I'm not blaming you. So why are you so anxious?" "The main reason is that I'm too slow." This area has been plowed by others, so it's normal that we can't find the ancient spirits. Relax. Do you want to eat something? The wild boar shook its head firmly. Before it helped the swordsman find the ancient spirits, it swore that it would not eat a single bite. The more the swordsman understood it, the more it was motivated. It wanted the swordsman to know that it was a good companion, not a cowardly piece of trash that only knew how to eat and drink. Another 2 days passed. The swordsman had finished his cultivation for the time being and increased his speed. This made the wild boar let out a sigh of relief. It was really difficult to find anything by always looking at the places that others had walked. On this day, a man and a boar were walking through the boundless terrain of the small universe. Suddenly, the wild boar twitched its nose and flew diagonally, opening its mouth and shouting, "Humph! Over here, over here. I finally found you." This was a reed marsh. The grass was tall, and there was no one around. When the breeze blew, the reed marsh was like a piece of silk with smooth waves. The color of the water reflected the sunlight, making it a very suitable place to hide spiritual vigor. The wild boar circled above the reed marsh and quickly narrowed down the range of its target. When it was done, Lu Xiaoyi also felt it. He had to admit that everything in the world had its own mysteries. Even if Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship was high and his mental strength was strong, he was far inferior to the wild boar when it came to finding the ancient spirits. Of course, he could not search every inch of the area. If he only used his divine sense, he would definitely miss it. There was nothing he could not admit. Lu Xiaoyi nodded and praised. "Old boar, you're so stubborn. If it was me, I wouldn't have felt it no matter what. How about this? Old boar, you go first. I'll be on the lookout. The next one will be mine." The wild boar was very touched. Although the swordsman was ruthless, he was really reasonable and did not use his power to bully a pig. How good would it be if all humans were like that? However, he refused firmly. "Old boar will take the ancient spirits after you." "Umph, I may be stupid, but I know the rules. If you don't take it, old boar will not take it." "Umph." Lu Xiaoyi was not pretentious. He knew the wild boar's intentions. It wanted to repay him for saving its life. There was no need for him to hypocritically give in. How big of a deal could it be? He laughed. "Then I'll accept your kindness. Back off and watch me show you what I'm going to do." The wild boar leaped to a high place and looked around. In its heart, every time it found the ancient spirits of Taisu, someone would definitely jump out to rob it. It needed to be very careful. However, after waiting for a while, there was no one in the surrounding space. It could not help but sigh. The heavenly Tao also bullied the weak and feared the strong. When it was its turn, everything was not going well. However, when it was the swordsman's turn to collect the ancient spirits, those robbers were nowhere to be seen. Could it be that they knew they could not snatch it, so they did not dare to come? Lu Xiaoyi exerted his strength below, but he was a little embarrassed. Because this thing was spiritual, it was extremely sensitive to the aura of a swordsman like him. He could not even get close to it, let alone collect it. The speed of the ancient spirits of Taisu was very fast. As a natural product of the Taisu realm, it had no shape and no substance. It was not something that a cultivator's escape technique could catch up to. It always maintained a certain distance from him. He had a feeling that if this thing really ran away after a long time, he would not be able to catch up to it. What should he do? Use the flying sword? This was a terrible idea. Moreover, even the flying sword might not be able to beat this kind of spiritual object in terms of speed. After thinking for a while, he had to change his method of collecting the ancient spirits. Thus, he restrained his aura and released the natural big spotted bird from the Sparrow Palace. It did not have any aura, as if it was one with the small universe. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.